If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Show Yourself, Dumbledore. Starlight gathered out of nothing. It poured together above him, weaving into the shape of a vast winged creature. When its wings unfurled, fragments of silver light scattered like falling constellations. The starlight kite swept in a slow circle around Regulus. He hadn't summoned it. When the danger crossed a certain threshold, the power buried deep within his soul, the part that longed for freedom and the endless unknown, answered on its own. The starlight kite lifted its head and let out a clear, ringing cry. The sound rippled through the narrow passageway. Inside the grey mist, every twisted face froze at once. A legendary creature that fed on starlight and pierced through space itself, its very existence denied confinement and restraint. Where its body of pure, positive magic passed, the mist began to tremble. It was the instinctive shudder of prey sensing its natural enemy. The Patronus did not attack. It simply flew into the grey mist, weaving between the densely packed faces. Silver-white wings carved trails of light through the haze. Any face brushed by those luminous streaks dissolved instantly. No black smoke. No residue. As though it had never existed. Regulus watched the starlight kite move through the mist. It flew without hurry. Each beat of its wings stirred a tide of drifting starlight. The faces tried to retreat, scrambling backward in panic. But the corridor was too narrow. They crowded and crushed against one another, with nowhere to run. This was the essence of the Patronus charm, a manifestation of pure, positive emotion, innately suppressing all negative magic. The despair and agony condensed within the mist melted before the starlight kite at a visible rate. He remembered the state of mind he'd held when he first summoned it, his yearning for a wider world, his stubborn devotion to the idea of freedom itself. That longing alone was a blade against despair. And because the starlight kite fed on starlight and could pierce space, it could reach directly into the core structure of negative magic. No brute force was required. It only had to exist. Starlight washed over the mist. The faces collapsed like sandcastles stripped of their foundations. The Patronus circled the outer edge of the Protego barrier. Wherever its wings swept, the grey mist recoiled. The pressure against the shield dropped sharply, giving Regulus a moment to observe the battlefield. That was when he saw the problem. The faces erased by the starlight kite began to reform several breaths later, emerging from deeper within the mist. There was no visible process, no origin. They simply reappeared. He locked onto the nearest one. It dissolved beneath the starlight. 3 seconds later, the same features surfaced elsewhere in the haze. Understanding settled coldly in his chest. The starlight kite was clearing the symptoms, not the source. As long as the origin remained intact, the faces could regenerate without limit. And the origin was inside the stone door. He reinforced the Protego. The barrier thickened again, solid and steady, though the drain on his magic continued unabated. Each impact weakened the shield a fraction. Each weakening demanded more magic from him. Maintaining the starlight kite also consumed mental strength. If this went on, the barrier's collapse would only be a matter of time. Another detail caught his attention. The faces reacted violently to the presence of living breath. They slammed themselves against the barrier in a frenzy, mouths stretched wide, hollow eye sockets fixed on him. What were they craving? Life force? Fresh emotion? Or simply existence itself? These creations, condensed from pain, seemed instinctively drawn to the vitality of the living. There was purpose in their hunger, a desire to assimilate. Perhaps they needed living beings to fill the emptiness within, dragging more lives into the same abyss of suffering. Time passed. Cuthbert and Alex should have made it out of the passage by now. Regulus calculated quickly. If the professors had been alerted, they ought to have encountered them by now. If not, the two of them could still reach Professor Slughorn in short order. He refused to stake everything on rescue. Worst case, he would break out alone. If it came to that, he would burn the place to the ground. But not yet. With a subtle shift of thought, the starlight kite responded. Outside the barrier, it beat its wings sharply. White light erupted outward in a sweeping curtain, clearing every trace of grey mist within 10 meters in an instant. Faces evaporated in the brilliance. The corridor, for a brief heartbeat, was clear. Then the silver form flashed once and vanished. Regulus calculated fast. The starlight kite's final sweep, combined with his newly reinforced Protego, would buy him about a minute. 1 minute before the shield gave way. He mapped out contingencies. If the starlight kite failed to locate the source, if the professors did not arrive in time, he would need an exit. Space warp was the last resort. As long as he didn't misjudge direction or embed himself into solid stone, the remaining risks were manageable. Whether the bodily splitting damage from space warp resembled that of apparition, whether Dittany would be effective, those questions had never been tested. Fiend fire stood ready as well. Even if control proved impossible, he would burn what needed burning. He was 12. If he'd had one more year, perhaps he could have faced this more calmly, without every option carrying such risk. He needed to learn more. Train harder. None of that mattered now. Everything was prepared. All that remained was the starlight kite's return. Cracks spread across the barrier again. Grey mist surged back in. The faces were thicker than before, layered so densely they nearly plastered themselves against the shield. They opened their mouths in silent screams. Despair seeped through the barrier and struck at Regulus's mind. The mental barrier held most of the assault at bay, but the weight remained, like something heavy pressing against his chest. 30 seconds passed. The starlight kite did not return. He stopped hesitating. Space warp gathered at the brink of release. Fiend fire coiled, ready to answer. Just as the spell teetered on the edge of being cast, a cry rang out in his mind. The starlight kite. The sound of a mission fulfilled. Regulus froze the space warp at its critical threshold. Something light settled onto his left shoulder. He turned. The starlight kite stood there, meeting his gaze. Its eyes were the same shade as his, and within them lay entire constellations. They reflected the corridor around them now. Clutched in its beak was a wand. A thin layer of silver-white radiance wrapped the wood, but its true nature was still visible. Black walnut. The surface bore deep and shallow grooves, corroded and scarred, like dried blood etched into the grain. A dull, dark sheen clung to it. Midway along the wand, a segment of hard material was embedded within the wood. The substance was unclear, only a pale yellow edge visible beneath the curling grain. Regulus reached out with his senses. Inside the wand was a vortex. Despair and agony churned endlessly within it. The grey mist. The faces. Every strand of negative energy originated here. Each face's final moment of pain. Their resentment after death. All of it sealed inside this single wand. Agony flashed through his mind, joints crushed, skin seared, organs rotting from within. The pain was so vivid his brows knit tight. Now he understood. This was where every face returned. The condensed despair and suffering were leaking from the wand itself. When a face was destroyed, it flowed back along some unseen magical tether, reassembling once more. He had never heard of a wand so dependent on negative magic, capable of generating its own attack forms. It was less a tool and more a living vessel of pain, spilling centuries of accumulated darkness into the world. He set aside questions of who had orchestrated this. Whether the goal had been to seize the wand or simply wreak havoc at Hogwarts. None of that mattered. Destroy it, and everything would end. He opened his left hand. A mass of blazing white fire rose from his palm, the heat warping the air around it. He could not erase intangible negative energy. But he could break a physical wand. The starlight kite blinked at him and it released its grip. The wand dropped toward the flames. Just as the tip was about to touch the fire, a hand reached in from the side and caught the wand lightly between two fingers. No warning. No ripple of magic. No distortion of space. The hand seemed as though it had always been there, only unnoticed. Regulus's pupils tightened. He looked up. Albus Dumbledore stood beside him, inside the Protogo barrier. He wore deep purple pajamas patterned with stars, a matching robe thrown loosely over them. His long silver hair and beard were slightly disheveled, as if he'd just climbed out of bed. In his free hand, he still held an empty teacup. A smear of glistening honey clung to its rim. Between two fingers, he lifted the wand to eye level and examined it. His blue eyes narrowed behind half-moon spectacles. After a few seconds, as though recognizing something, he flicked his wrist. The wand vanished. Only then did he turn to Regulus. Warm blue eyes regarded him calmly through the lenses. Regulus steadied his breathing and extinguished the fire in his palm. The starlight kite remained perched on his shoulder, head tilted as it studied Dumbledore with unabashed curiosity, silver-grey eyes gleaming. "Good evening, Headmaster Dumbledore," Regulus said, inclining his head slightly. His voice was steadier than he felt, though still a touch breathless. Chapter 102, the resentment plague wand bonus. When Regulus saw Albus Dumbledore standing there, his first reaction was that it made sense. He wasn't even that surprised. Hermes's injury. Darren's movements. The curse behind the stone door. Once those pieces were laid out in order, Dumbledore appearing at the end of it felt almost inevitable. For a fleeting second, another thought crossed his mind. Was this all arranged? Was Hermes's injury part of the design too, just to see whether he would follow the trail? He pushed the idea down almost immediately. It was pointless. Even if it were true, what could he do about it? Confront the headmaster? Pretend ignorance? Neither option changed anything. So he let it go. Tonight's drain had been far beyond normal. He hadn't cast that many spells. Protego had held from start to finish. The starlight kite had only appeared at the end. There hadn't been much in the way of complex magic. Yet the exhaustion was heavier than most training sessions. It was a matter of volume. The faces had slammed into the barrier again and again. Every impact cost magic to absorb. Worse was the erosion of his mind. Each face carried despair and agony. They pressed against the shield, trying to seep along the current of his magic and burrow into his thoughts. He had to keep pouring in clean magic, purifying, reinforcing, maintaining. A duel with Orion was different. Power met power. The cost was visible, measurable. Tonight had been a slow bleed, as if 100 tiny cuts were draining him at once. His meditation technique ran at full capacity just to keep up with the loss. On the mental level, he had to sustain his occlumency barrier without pause. A single lapse could have allowed the negative magic to slip inside. Still, he hadn't dropped his defenses. Protego remained in place. The starlight kite perched on his shoulder. The Patronus's silver glow illuminated a circle around them. The grey mist lingered outside the light, unwilling to approach. Dumbledore blinked, a gentle smile curving his lips. His white beard trembled faintly with each breath. He raised his right hand. His index finger extended, and a small glow blossomed at the tip. The light was soft. Not blinding. Like the first ray of sunrise slipping through cloud cover. It spread outward. Not in a violent surge, but like water flowing naturally across the ground. Wherever the white light passed, the grey mist dissolved. The faces melted away without sound or struggle, as though they had never existed at all. When the light reached the stone door, it echoed back, gathering once more at Dumbledore's fingertip. It condensed into a small sphere, about the size of a pigeon's egg, still glowing with a warm, comforting radiance. Regulus felt it clearly. The tension in his mind loosened at once. The exhaustion he had accumulated was washed away like dust under warm water. He withdrew Protego. The faint blue barrier faded silently. The starlight kite tilted its head and let out a low cry. It brushed its beak affectionately against his cheek, warm for a lingering second, then dissolved into silver motes that scattered into the air. "What a beautiful bird," Dumbledore said, gazing at the space where it had vanished. Admiration filled his eyes. The starlight kite, a legendary creature said to feed on starlight and traverse space. "I never expected it to become your patronus." "Thank you for the compliment, Headmaster," Regulus replied with a slight bow, his tone respectful. "Your phoenix is just as remarkable. Rebirth from ashes, healing tears. It is one of the most admired guardians in the magical world." That Dumbledore knew of the starlight kite did not surprise him. Orion had told him to hide it. But he'd had neither the chance nor the strength tonight. And this was Dumbledore. If he saw it, he saw it. Dumbledore's eyes brightened with unmistakable pride. He stroked his beard. To receive recognition from a young wizard is quite delightful. Fawkes is indeed extraordinary, though he can be mischievous. On occasion, he leaves my office in a rather chaotic state. He tucked away the glowing sphere. When his hand emerged again, it held a pocket watch. The cover snapped open. He leaned in to check the time. 12 minutes to 3, Dumbledore said. "Which means, strictly speaking, I should say good morning." Regulus met his gaze directly. "Headmaster, have you been here all along?" "All along," Dumbledore replied with a calm nod. There was clear approval in his blue eyes. "From the moment you entered the astronomy tower. I watched you pass through the corridor and face the grey mist. When you chose to stay behind and cover your friend's retreat, I confess I was surprised. Very few first-year students can remain calm under such circumstances, let alone willingly shoulder that risk. Anyone capable would have done the same," Regulus answered, without the slightest hint of seeking credit. Cuthbert and Alex didn't have the means to deal with something like this. I couldn't leave them there. It was not an easy choice, Dumbledore said softly. In a crisis, to think of your classmates first. To remain behind deliberately. That is a fine quality. Many know what they ought to do. Fewer follow through when the moment comes. I only did what was necessary, Regulus replied evenly. My ability is stronger. Naturally, I should bear more. Staying behind was the most rational decision. It bought them time and minimized potential losses. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. Dumbledore studied him. Something flickered in the old man's eyes. He lifted a sleeve and gently dabbed at the corner of his eye. He then placed a warm, steady hand on Regulus's shoulder. You are more mature than I imagined, Mr. Black. And braver. He paused, then added, and more talented. Regulus lowered his head modestly, as though embarrassed by the praise. Regulus did not ask why Dumbledore had remained hidden until the final moment. Dumbledore did not ask how he had discovered the passage beneath the astronomy tower, nor why he had not reported it beforehand. The atmosphere stayed unusually harmonious. Dumbledore's smile never faded, and the admiration in his gaze was unconcealed, almost genuinely pleased by Regulus's performance. More importantly, Regulus had not felt his mental defenses being touched. Perhaps it had happened without his notice. This was Dumbledore, after all. If the headmaster truly intended to break through his occlumency, could he have failed? Or perhaps there had been no attempt. He was only a first year. At times, Dumbledore seemed stubbornly disciplined, restraining himself. That wand, Regulus said at last. What is it? His gaze dropped to Dumbledore's now empty left hand. The unsettling wand had already been put away. It is called the Resentment Plague Wand, Dumbledore answered without hesitation. He did not dismiss the question because of Regulus's age. Instead, he explained with deliberate seriousness. Regulus understood what that meant. Dumbledore was sharing a secret. Offering trust. He listened in silence. The smile on Dumbledore's face faded slightly, replaced by gravity. In the mid-16th century, an Italian dark wizard named Valentino Solito became obsessed with manifesting pain into tangible magic. He turned his attention to the Black Death sweeping across Europe and intercepted skeleton moths carrying the pathogen. Skeleton moths? Regulus asked. He remembered reading about them. He had not expected them to connect to this wand. Indeed. A creature capable of spreading magical plague, Dumbledore said. Valentino twisted and altered the pathogen with dark magic, developing the Resentment Plague curse. It does not kill immediately. Instead, it spreads through skeleton moths. The infected suffer first from rotting skin and unbearable joint pain. Then their senses are consumed by agony. Their consciousness is gradually devoured by despair. After weeks of torment, they die. And the faces, Regulus pressed, are condensed from the victim's pain. Precisely. A trace of sorrow passed through Dumbledore's eyes. Valentino used this method to slaughter over 70,000 residents of Bolzano and surrounding villages in northern Italy. The ultimate pain and despair of every victim were condensed through dark magic into the Resentment Plague Wand. Regulus's fingers brushed lightly together as he organized the information. The wand wood is black walnut. The core must be Valentino's finger bone mixed with powdered skeleton moth wings. Dumbledore raised his brows, then smiled. You observe carefully. That is correct. Professor Marcus Valerius, together with 3 other professors, eventually defeated Valentino. They seized the wand but found it impossible to destroy. The pain magic had fused completely with it. Forceful destruction would have caused the magic to leak and trigger a secondary catastrophe. So it was hidden within Hogwarts, sealed under layers of ancient protective spells. A thought stirred in Regulus's mind. Dumbledore was explaining why he had intervened to take the wand. But even a physical wand. I couldn't destroy it. The idea flickered and passed. Headmaster, he asked, what was that white light just now? The faces I struggled to hold back had no resistance against it. Dumbledore smiled again. The wrinkles at his eyes deepened, and there was a hint of mischief in his expression. It was only a beam of light, he said lightly. Though I suppose it carried a touch of light within it. Regulus nodded. He understood. Opposing attributes. Chapter 103, I've taken an interest in wands bonus. That was the logic of it. Dumbledore had said it lightly, almost casually. Regulus knew it wasn't that simple. He replayed the scene in his mind. The white light passed through, and every face dissolved like frost beneath the sun. Then he thought of himself, nearly drained dry just to hold the line. The gap between them was so vast it was almost invisible. But gaps could be closed. McNair, Avery, and Mr. Rosier are all in the hospital wing, Dumbledore said, shifting the subject. He looked down at Regulus, his expression gentle. McNair was injured and requires treatment. He will remember only that tonight's operation ended in complete failure, nothing more. Avery and Rosier arrived safely. They were frightened, but Madame Pomfrey assures me a night's rest will suffice. Then he asked, would you like to visit them? Regulus shook his head. The exhaustion was bone deep, especially in his mind. No. I'd like to return to my dormitory and rest. He did not ask what would become of McNair. He did not ask about the truth behind Hermes's curse. He would wait for Hermes to speak for himself. As you wish. Dumbledore did not insist. There was only understanding in his eyes. Saturday morning at 10. If you are available, perhaps we might speak further in my office. He blinked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I happen to keep an excellent salon tea. Quite worth the visit. I'd be delighted, Headmaster, Regulus replied with a nod. Dumbledore extended an arm, inviting him to take hold. Allow me to send you back. It will save you some time. Regulus hesitated for half a second, then reached out and grasped the headmaster's sleeve. In the next instant, space rippled violently around him. Yet it felt nothing like apparition's suffocating compression. Nor did it resemble the slipping sensation of space warp. It was as though he had been wrapped in a thin, warm membrane. The space around him twisted, folded inward, and then exchanged places. The corridor stretched like a canvas being pulled taut, and in the blink of an eye, it became the Slytherin common room. The entire process flowed as naturally as breathing. No dizziness. No discomfort. Dumbledore did not appear with him. Regulus stood still for a moment. Was that high-level spatial magic mastered by Dumbledore himself? Or some special privilege granted by Hogwarts to its headmaster? Had the display been deliberate, or merely convenient? Perhaps both. Dumbledore had likely noticed his interest in spatial magic. This might have been a subtle hint. The common room was quiet. The embers in the fireplace still gave off a faint warmth. Regulus sat down on a sofa and replayed the night's events. It had been reckless. He had followed only Hermes's clue and Darren's suspicious behavior, then led Cuthbert and Alex straight into the passage. He had not fully understood the danger beyond the stone door. He had not anticipated that the resentment plague wand would be so far beyond expectation. More than that, he had not expected Darren to be so impatient, to act without even mastering a method to suppress the wand. That miscalculation had disrupted his original plan entirely. Next time, if anything similar occurred, he would gather sufficient information first. He would prepare thoroughly. He would not rush in blind again. Dumbledore's words echoed in his mind. Only a beam of light, carrying a touch of light within it. It reminded him of an idea that had once flashed through his thoughts. Light was not only illumination. It could transmit signals. And as Dumbledore had implied, it could carry something more. Light was light. But clearly he meant something aligned with positive magic. Regulus's thoughts instinctively turned another way. If light could carry light, could it not carry darkness as well? Black light was still light. Light cut through darkness. Darkness swallowed light. That line of research deserved deeper exploration. Then there was Dumbledore's conduct tonight. Watching from start to finish. Intervening only at the last moment. Regulus gave a faint shake of his head. That matched his impression of the headmaster. What he had revealed was not much, but it was significant. That was on him. He had not been prepared enough. Still, what had Dumbledore seen? Covering his companion's retreat. The Patronus. It all aligned neatly with the headmaster's preferences. If the starlight kite had arrived 1 second later, Dumbledore would have witnessed fiend fire. The corner of Regulus's mouth twitched faintly. He had imagined that his first serious conversation with the headmaster would take place before the mirror of Ariste, that mirror capable of revealing one's deepest desire. He had not expected it to follow a crisis like this, unfolding in such a measured, peaceful manner. But perhaps this was better. The fatigue crashed over him like a rising tide. He rose, returned to his dormitory, shrugged off his robes and tossed them onto a chair, then fell straight into bed. Within minutes, his breathing evened out. At dawn, the dormitory door opened quietly. Cuthbert and Alex returned. They paused when they saw Regulus asleep, then moved carefully toward him. Even so, the faint sound of their steps roused him. His eyes opened slowly. "Are you all right?" Cuthbert leaned in at the bedside, his voice low and subdued. Alex stood beside him. The usual timidity in his posture had softened. "Thank you, Regulus. I'm fine." Regulus sat up. "Just tired." He looked at Alex, his tone gentle. "No need to thank me." Then he glanced at Cuthbert. "I brought you with me. It was my responsibility to make sure you came back safely." He could see it clearly. The gratitude in Alex's eyes was sincere. Cuthbert had volunteered from the start. He had been eager. Alex had not. He had followed passively. But now, there was no ulterior motive in him. "The headmaster has handled it. There won't be any more danger," Regulus said as he rose from the bed. His voice was calm. "McNair is being treated in the hospital wing. This matter ends here." He added, "Don't speak of it." Though he said it that way, he knew it was not truly over. But what remained was no longer his concern. It was Dumbledore's. After all, he was the headmaster. If someone caused trouble within Hogwarts and the headmaster did nothing, that would raise questions. Especially at a time like this. Failure to act could be perceived as weakness. Unless Dumbledore had other plans. Cuthbert and Alex exchanged a look and nodded. Neither pressed further. After what they had experienced, their trust in Regulus had deepened. If he said it was over, they believed him. Yet while the crisis had ended, something else had shifted. Regulus could see it. Cuthbert had shed some of his impatience. There was steadiness in him now. Alex had cast off much of his timidity. There was resolve where hesitation once lingered. And when they looked at Regulus, beyond trust, there was a quiet sense of belonging. "Let's go." "Breakfast," Regulus said, stepping toward the great hall. They followed at once, their strides light and even. He had not fully recovered. His mind still carried traces of fatigue. But his magic had replenished. Classes proceeded as usual through the morning. After charms that afternoon, Regulus headed straight for the library. Last night had sparked something. He had developed a genuine interest in wands. He had never cared much before. His wand functioned well enough without him putting much thought into it. When Ollivander had sold it to him, the wandmaker had spoken at length. Blackthorn wood. Dragon heartstring core. 12 1/4 inches. Reasonably supple. Symbolic of strength, explosive force, courage. Suited for powerful spell casting. Best matched to a wizard with abundant magic and a willingness to take risks. Compatible with both dark and light magic. Its bond with its owner would deepen over time. Ollivander had even remarked that he would accomplish great things. Standard configuration. Nothing extraordinary. At the time, Regulus had thought a wand was merely a tool. As long as it worked, that was enough. Now he had changed his mind. The resentment plague wand had overturned his understanding entirely. A wand was not merely a conduit for spells. It could be a vessel. A carrier of curses. The crystallization of a dark craft. He wanted to know more. In the deeper section of the library, along the shelves dedicated to charms and wand lore, several rows were filled with books on wands. Regulus scanned the titles. On the origins of wandcraft. The resonance between wood and core. Biographies of renowned wand makers. He pulled out non-traditional wands and their dangers. The book was of moderate thickness, bound in dark brown leather. Carrying it to a seat by the window, he sat down and opened to the table of contents. Chapter 1 defined what non-traditional meant. Any method of wand making that deviated from Ollivander's established system fell under that category. Chapter 2 outlined the risks. Chapter 3 began sorting them into distinct types. Regulus flipped ahead. The title at the top of the page read, Emotion-Infused Wands. He leaned back slightly, the library window at his side casting pale afternoon light across the paper, and began to read. The text stated, wands of this category are not founded upon the natural magical resonance between wood and core. Instead, they are forged by forcibly infusing intense emotion into the body of the wand itself, transforming it into a sustained source of emotional influence. The crafting process commonly involves dark magic. Under specific conditions, emotion must be extracted and sealed within the wand. The preservation stage is often accompanied by the sacrifice of life. Chapter 104, Against the Natural Order. The wailing wand was infused with the dying screams of battlefield souls. Its wielder would hear those screams without pause, day and night, until the mind finally shattered. The Covenant wand was steeped in the regret of betrayers at the moment their treachery was exposed. It amplified suspicion in everyone nearby, turning doubt into paranoia and driving groups into vicious internal strife. The relic wand drew on the ecstasy of martyrs at the instant of execution. Those who carried it developed an overwhelming urge to sacrifice themselves, sometimes even seeking death of their own accord. There was no mention of the resentment plague wand. Regulus considered that for a moment. That probably meant the examples in this book were not obscure enough. Different aberrations, recorded in different volumes. He kept turning pages, reading slowly, pausing often to think. All of these wands shared one trait. They strayed from the norm. They were no longer simple tools meant to help a wizard cast spells more effectively. They were constructs with built-in effects, and those effects always came at a price. He reached a chapter discussing the mutual influence between wand and wielder. The author wrote, "The wand chooses the wizard, but the wizard also shapes the wand. With prolonged use of the same wand, a wizard's magical traits, casting habits, and even personality inclinations leave subtle imprints upon it. In extreme cases, a wand will gradually adapt to its bearer, undergoing minute transformations." Regulus thought of his own wand. Blackthorn, Dragon Heartstring, 12 1/4 inches. He had used it for over half a year now. Had it changed? His casting style emphasized control and precision. His magic flowed steady and fine, measured rather than explosive. Would those tendencies leave marks as well? It seemed likely. Outside the window, the sky darkened. He closed the book. Time for dinner. Afterward, he did not return to the library. He had no intention of going to the restricted section, nor the room of requirement. He needed rest. His body lay flat against the mattress, but his mind kept working. Eyes closed, he began to take inventory. Protego, Reducto, Expelliarmus, Wingardium Leviosa, Reparo, Incendio, Conf Ringo, Oxio. He could list 100 foundational spells without effort. Apparition and the Patronus charm. Higher level magic, mastered as well. In Transfiguration, he could complete single substance reconstruction. His exploration of spatial magic hovered at the threshold of fold shifting. In star-guided meditation, he had lit 4.5 stars. Verdant magic allowed him to guide plant life force. Occlumency had built a mental labyrinth. In the dark arts, he had mastered the 3 unforgivable curses. He had even studied variations, analyzed structure and theory. He understood the incantation, gestures, and techniques of fiend fire. He had never cast it. But if he chose to, he could. The list stretched long in his mind. Each entry replayed clearly. Yet the scene beneath the astronomy tower refused to fade. Grey mist, faces. All he had been able to do was raise Protego and stand there. His wand in hand, spell after spell flashing through his thoughts, yet none felt usable. Impedimenta? Incendio? Conf Ringo? Reducto? Or summon Dumbledore? Fiend fire would burn it, certainly. But once released, if he failed to control it, that would become a different disaster. And the real problem was numbers. One face crashed against the shield, and Protego consumed a measure of magic. His mental barrier bore a measure of pressure. Every face screamed, radiating despair and agony. The negative emotion itself eroded the barrier. His magic was a dam. The grey mist was a rising flood. No matter how solid the dam, water would eventually crest the top. Destroy them? Of course he could. Each face that struck Protego dissolved on impact. But the next one surfaced immediately from the mist, as though nothing had been lost. The source lay beyond the stone door. Inside that wand. As long as the source remained, every attack was meaningless. Only then did he recognize what he had overlooked. Attribute suppression. Darkness, despair, pain. When something is built entirely from negative magic, conventional spells lose efficiency. Protego forms a magical barrier. It blocks physical force and spell impact. But against emotional corrosion, its defense weakens. Reducto can shatter stone. It cannot disperse condensed resentment. Water extinguishes flame. It does not erase the superheated currents of a wildfire. When Dumbledore introduced the resentment plague wand, Regulus remembered every detail. Northern Italy. Bolzano and its surrounding villages. The Black Death compounded by the resentment plague curse, twisted by dark magic. Each infected victim endured weeks of torment before death. Valentino Solito extracted every ounce of their final suffering, compressed it, condensed it, sealed it. 70,000 strands of despair twisted into one force, infused into a wand body crafted from black walnut and finger bone. Of course it was powerful. 70,000 portions of negative magic could sustain a curse field for centuries. It was practically 70,000 lesser Dementors bound together. And yet, it was not invincible. Dumbledore had caught it between two fingers as easily as plucking a fallen leaf. There must have been something in his sleeve. Or some spell isolating the wand from the world. Perhaps his own magic functioned as the ultimate vessel, wrapping it whole. A world map surfaced in Regulus's mind. On that tectonic convergence of two continents lay an island nation, prone to earthquakes and volcanoes. In 1973, how many people lived there? 100 million? More? 70,000 souls had produced the resentment plague wand. What would 100 million create? The thought rose and was crushed immediately. Too abstract. Too dangerous. And against the natural order. Another idea followed. To confront something of extreme attribute, one must either counter it with an equal extreme or override it with a higher principle. The only extreme attribute magic he truly commanded was the Patronus charm. He could feel its purity clearly. A yearning for freedom. A longing for the vast world. An instinct to break every shackle. It was the ultimate condensation of positive emotion. A natural counter to negative magic. The faces feared it. The moment silver-white light touched them, they dissolved. The Patronus charm was profound. In the original accounts, many adult wizards never managed to summon a corporeal Patronus in their lifetime. Even producing mist was considered commendable. It demanded more than a happy memory. It required conviction. A luminous core strong enough to illuminate darkness. His starry dome could disperse the mist. But dispersion was not destruction. The faces regenerated because the source remained. His Patronus was more like a lamp, pushing back the dark within its radius. To purify an entire sea of grey mist with a single ray of light, as Dumbledore had done, would require not a lamp, but a sun. The gap was obvious. The other path was fiend fire. Fiend fire did not care about attributes. It devoured everything. Black or white, it burned all to ash. Perhaps that revealed a deeper magical philosophy. When opposing attributes fail, override the conflict with existence itself. What does fiend fire symbolize? Regulus considered it. Pure destruction. The primal impulse to return all things to nothing. It stood above attribute opposition because it belonged to no camp. It was simply termination. That was why it was dangerous. It consumed the enemy. It consumed the caster as well. Thus, it was classified as dark magic. Regulus did not believe it was dark at all. He opened his eyes and stared at the patterns woven into the canopy above his bed. Dumbledore had chosen light to resolve the crisis. And he had made sure Regulus saw it. That beam had been gentle and natural. Wherever it passed, the grey mist vanished without sound. The Headmaster certainly possessed other methods. He could cast fiend fire. He knew dark magic. The Patronus was nothing to him. Yet he chose the most restrained and the most correct option. Light. Regulus's lips twitched, though his expression did not change. He understood the message. There are countless paths in magic. I chose this one because I believe it is worth choosing. Dumbledore had not displayed power. He had displayed choice. Methods needed expanding. Extreme attribute magic required research. Higher level override concepts like fiend fire needed deeper understanding, but not recklessness. Star-guided meditation remained his foundation. Verdant magic and spatial magic were direction. Everything else would follow in rhythm. Rushing would achieve nothing. He was only in his first year. There was time. Dash. The next morning, Regulus went to the hospital wing with Cuthbert and Alex. Hermes was awake. Madame Pomfrey said the curse had receded, though he remained weak. When they entered the ward, Hermes was propped against his pillows. His complexion was grey-white, eye sockets hollow. He looked as though half his bones had been removed, his robes hanging loosely from a frame that had shrunk. Regulus stopped at the bedside. Hermes lifted his eyelids to look at him. There was no emotion in his gaze. Only fatigue. Focus on recovering, Regulus said. His tone was even. Not overly concerned. Not distant. Just a straightforward greeting. Cuthbert stood slightly behind him, his back straighter than usual. When he looked at Hermes, his chin tilted up a fraction. He said nothing at first, but the message in his eyes was unmistakable. Whatever almost killed you, I flattened it. He remembered Regulus's warning not to say too much. He failed. You're not that impressive, are you? Cuthbert said quietly, each word crisp. Hermes's eyes shifted toward him. He did not argue. Chapter 105, Professor, I was wrong. Alex stood beside Cuthbert. This time, when he looked at Hermes Mulciber, he didn't avert his eyes. He had never liked his gloomy dorm mate. But seeing him lying there in the hospital bed, pale and hollow, something shifted inside him. The long-standing timidity that used to weigh on his chest had been replaced. It wasn't exactly courage. It was closer to what Cuthbert felt. Once you've been through something real, you stop feeling so small. His lips moved. He didn't have Cuthbert's swagger. Get well soon, he said quietly. They didn't stay long. Madame Pomfrey hadn't set a time limit today, but the three of them were already turning to leave after less than 5 minutes. As Regulus stepped away from the bed, Hermes suddenly spoke. His voice rasped like sandpaper. Thank you. Regulus didn't turn around. He only lifted a hand in acknowledgement and walked out. Outside the hospital wing, they ran into Abro's Mulciber. He still wore that dark, patterned black robe, standing in the corridor's shadow like a statue carved from stone. Regulus slowed. You two go ahead, he said to Cuthbert and Alex. Cuthbert glanced at Abro's, then back at Regulus, and nodded. He and Alex gave Abro's a slight bow in greeting before hurrying off down the hall. Silence settled once they were gone. Abro's didn't speak. He simply turned and walked toward a corner near the stairwell. Regulus followed. They stopped in a blind spot beside the staircase. No portraits. No passing students. Dumbledore came yesterday morning, Abro said at last, his voice low and even. He lifted the curse from Hermes. Regulus waited. He said nothing else. The meaning was clear. Dumbledore had come. He had handled the curse. But he hadn't pursued the Mulciber family's responsibility, nor had he mentioned the details beneath the astronomy tower. Perhaps it was an exchange. Or an understanding. Regulus believed that whatever opportunity Dumbledore had offered, Abro's would seize it. Abro's gaze settled on him. His grey-brown eyes churned with restrained emotion. In the future, Hermes will need more of your guidance. Regulus's thoughts sharpened instantly. That wasn't a simple request to let Hermes tag along. Was the Mulciber family taking a stance? Do they think I stand with Dumbledore? This wasn't like the old transaction with Borgin and Burks. They wanted Black family support in the Wisengamot. The Mulcibers likely wanted something else. A safer position under Dumbledore's attention. Dumbledore had spoken with Abros. The content was unknown. The result was obvious. Hermes was being placed closer to Regulus. It was speculation. But Regulus suspected he wasn't wrong. Dumbledore was raising the stakes around him. Understood, Regulus replied evenly. Abros gave a slight nod and left without another word. That morning's potions class was shared with Gryffindor. Professor Slughorn was teaching a strengthening draft. The ingredient tables held viper fangs, dried nettles, horned caterpillars, and jars of oddly colored pus. Regulus partnered with Alex. Alex's hands were quick enough, but when it came to crushing the viper fangs, he hesitated, lacking decisiveness. Regulus handled the brewing. The liquid in the cauldron shifted from inky green to brownish yellow, then settled into a deep, molten caramel brown. Smooth and even. No bubbles broke the surface. The viscosity was balanced. Leaning closer, one could smell a sharp but stable sulfur note. Slughorn strolled over and dipped a silver spoon into the potion, holding it up to the light. The liquid coated the spoon in a thin, even film. The color was pure. The transparency just right. Perfect. Slughorn beamed. Color, consistency, aroma. All precisely as required, even better than expected. 10 points to Slytherin. A few muffled gasps rose around the classroom. Across the room, Mary MacDonald flashed Regulus a thumbs up. He inclined his head slightly in return. Alfred Pruitt gave a faint snort and bent back over his own cauldron, which was still bubbling unevenly. When the bell rang, students packed up and filed out. Regulus remained seated. Cuthbert and Alex followed his lead. Once the classroom emptied, leaving only the three of them, Regulus stood and approached the front. Slughorn was organizing ingredients. He looked up, eyebrows lifting. "Professor," Regulus began, "we owe you an apology regarding Hermes Mulciber." Slughorn stepped around the desk, folding his hands over his stomach. "We knew he went to the astronomy tower," Regulus continued. "We didn't report it in time. We wanted to uncover the truth ourselves." Cuthbert reacted quickly, stepping half a pace forward. "We were wrong, Professor." "Sorry," Alex added softly. Slughorn studied them. His smile faded slightly, but there was no anger in his eyes. After a few seconds of silence, he spoke. "It's natural for young wizards to be curious. To want to prove they can solve things on their own. I did much the same in my youth, though nothing quite as dangerous as this." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But you must understand. The professors at Hogwarts are not here merely to teach you how to stir a cauldron or wave a wand. We are also responsible for ensuring you leave this school alive. Some secrets remain secrets because they truly are lethal." His gaze swept across the three of them. "If you encounter something like this again, come to me first. Or to another professor. That isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Understood?" "Understood," Regulus said. "Good." Slughorn's smile returned. He opened a drawer and took out a crystal vial filled with golden liquid. "1 drop each before bed. It will steady your nerves and dispel lingering negative effects." They accepted the vial, thanked him, and left. Once they emerged from the dungeon, Cuthbert let out a breath. "I thought he'd dock points." "He won't," Regulus said. "He wanted the attitude." "What attitude?" Alex asked. "Admit the mistake and ready to accept guidance." "Don't repeat it," Regulus replied calmly. That was the official answer. Privately, Regulus thought, recognize the mistake, correct it, and if necessary, commit it again. That afternoon's herbology lesson took place in Greenhouse 3. They were fertilizing puff apods. Professor Sprout wore thick dragon hide gloves, demonstrating how to sprinkle dragon dung evenly around the roots without provoking the pods into releasing corrosive slime. Regulus was assigned an especially plump puff apod. He crouched down, pressing one hand against the pod's outer shell to keep it from wriggling, while using a small trowel to loosen the soil around the roots. At the same time, he extended his magical perception. He could sense the lively, almost mischievous vitality within the pod, and the rough but pure magical energy contained in the dragon dung. The moment the two made contact, the pod shivered slightly. A healthy oil-green sheen spread across its surface. After class ended and the other students left, Regulus remained in the greenhouse. Professor Sprout was watering a pot of Screech Snap when she noticed him. "Is there something you need, Mr. Black?" "Yes, Professor." He approached. "I have a question about magical plant attributes." She set down her watering can and wiped her hands on her apron. "Go on. If magic can have opposing attributes, such as light and dark, do plants possess similar properties? Is there a plant that naturally suppresses dark magic, or perhaps fosters hope?" Sprout regarded him with curiosity, though there was approval in her expression as well. She led him deeper into the greenhouse. They stopped before a row of shelves against the wall. Several clay pots held unassuming silver grass, with slender leaves edged in fine serrations. "Moonlight orchid," Sprout said. "It blooms only on full moon nights. The petals glow like moonlight, their color shifting with the month. It has a repelling effect on certain low-tier dark creatures, such as the carrion parasites that accompany Inferi." She gently brushed a leaf with her gloved fingers. "More importantly, its pollen can be refined into a calming draft. It stabilizes the mind and helps resist minor spiritual corrosion. Saint Mungo's frequently uses it to treat emotional trauma following dark magic injuries." Regulus examined the plant closely. Fine down covered the leaves, giving them a pearly sheen under the greenhouse lights. "But it can't counter something on the level of a Dementor, correct?" he asked respectfully. Dementors were extreme negative magic. Despair incarnate. Sprout shook her head. "No. Moonlight Orchid offers support and relief. To confront darkness of that magnitude, you would need something far more extreme. Like what, Professor? Regulus pressed. Chapter 106, Help and Concern Bonus. Professor Sprout fell silent for a moment, then crossed the greenhouse to a locked glass cabinet. She drew out a key and opened it. Inside, there was only a single pot. A small shrub, no more than a foot tall. Its branches were black as charcoal, yet the leaves were pure white. Fine golden threads shimmered through the veins like liquid light. Sunlight ebony bush, she said softly. According to legend, it grows only in ancient church graveyards or on the grounds where martyrs fell. It survives only in an environment of extreme purity. Her fingers brushed one of the leaves with surprising gentleness. And by purity, that doesn't mean sunlight. It means faith made manifest. She looked at it the way one might look at a beloved child. There's only this one at Hogwarts. It was left behind 300 years ago by a Ravenclaw headmaster. Something stirred in Regulus's mind. The relic wand? Professor, he asked evenly, what does it do? Purification. Her tone sharpened. It converts dark magic into harmless neutral magic slowly. And only if the caster possesses a powerful inclination toward the light. Instinctively, Regulus began to extend his magical perception, ready to call upon Verdant magic and forge a connection. Her gaze snapped to him, firm and unyielding. He stopped at once and looked back with studied innocence. She held that stare for a few seconds longer before shutting the cabinet and locking it. Commit this to memory, she said. For now, your task is to build foundations. Learn the rhythm of plant life. Learn to resonate with natural magic. Opposing attributes are advanced study. You can worry about that when you're preparing for your newts. He nodded. Understood. Thank you, Professor. So she had noticed. Natural magic. But he was on the right path. When he left the greenhouse, dusk had settled over the grounds. The corridors of the castle carried the warm scent of dinner, and somewhere in the distance students were laughing, shoving one another toward the great hall. Regulus slowed his pace. Moonlight orchid. Sunlight ebony bush. One gentle. One extreme. So even the plant world had its own spectrum of attributes. He thought of Dumbledore's light. Gentle, yet unstoppable. Maybe gentleness and extremity weren't opposites at all. True power might be achieving the most extreme result in the gentlest way possible. He couldn't do that yet. He wasn't strong enough. He needed time to study and practice. More stars lit along the path of his star-guided meditation. The greenhouse door swung shut behind him. Professor Sprout remained where she was, watching the glass pane tremble slightly in its frame. Evening light slanted across the stone floor, casting long shadows. The air carried the rich blend of soil, humus, dragon dung, and the mingled scents of 100 magical plants. It reminded her of yesterday at this same hour. She had been repotting several venomous tentacula imported from Albania. They were temperamental plants, demanding about light and soil magic, and always required careful handling after transplantation. Footsteps had sounded behind her. Familiar ones. She'd known immediately who it was. When she turned, Dumbledore stood in the central aisle of the greenhouse. He wore a deep purple robe embroidered with tiny stars. His beard was tied neatly with a clasp. Pomona, he said in that unheard voice of his, there's something I'd like to discuss. They moved to the small sitting area in the corner, where 2 wicker chairs flanked a round table. From his sleeve, he produced a tin. With a tap of his finger, steam rose from it. Honey tea, as always. He poured 2 cups and slid one toward her. About Regulus Black, he said. She lifted her cup, one brow arching slightly. That child. Dumbledore paused, as if searching for the right word. He's unusual. She inclined her head. On that, she agreed. From his very first herbology lesson, Regulus Black had stood apart. Most first years reacted to bubotubers in predictable ways. They flinched from touching them, recoiled in disgust, or blundered forward and nearly splattered themselves with pus. Black had done none of that. His movements were precise. Efficient. And he asked questions. Thoughtful ones. He noticed things sensed things that other young witches and wizards overlooked. That was talent. Not rare. There were always those particularly sensitive to magic. What was rare was his attitude toward magical plants. She could tell he didn't love them. Not the way she had as a girl. He was interested in what magical plants represented. In the magic behind them. Not the life itself. He cared about how to use them. That both impressed and unsettled her. Each lesson, the Slytherin boy pressed further. Did magical plants have emotions? Why was the mandrake's cry fatal? Why didn't mandrakes affect one another with their own screams? His questions deepened each time. From plant characteristics to magical properties, then to the interaction between plants, environment, and a wizard's magic. She remembered one class clearly. They had been loosening soil and repotting mandrake seedlings. She had seen him guide a thread of natural magic toward the seedling, establishing a temporary but stable connection. Verdant magic. Of course she recognized it. Understood it, even. She hadn't exposed him. Instead, she'd kept him after class and spoken at length about magical plant tendencies. The nerve-paralyzing toxin of venomous tentacula. The life-draining nature of Devil's Snare. The sheer physical force of the Whomping Willow. And she knew he understood. More than that, he likely thought further than she had said. Accelerated depth described his learning trajectory perfectly. So she reminded him, again and again, to be careful. To slow down. To protect himself. At the table, Dumbledore took a sip of tea. The cup made a soft sound as it returned to the saucer. Tomorrow in Herbology, he said, Mr. Black may ask you some more advanced questions. She looked up. Such as? For example. He leaned forward slightly, fingers laced over his knee. Whether there exists a magical plant whose attribute relationship mirrors that of the Patronus and the Dementor. Light and darkness. Positive and negative. The form those opposing attributes take, and the principles behind them. She was silent for several seconds. That's Newt's level material, she said. Some of it goes beyond Hogwarts's curriculum. I know. His voice remained warm. But if Mr. Black asks, I hope you'll tell him everything you know. Including the sunlight ebony bush. She met his gaze directly. Behind his lenses, his eyes were steady and serious. Yes. Including the sunlight ebony bush. She set her teacup down a little harder than intended. Albus, she said, shaking her head slightly, you know the risks. That kind of purity light taken almost to obsession. Introducing a first year to that concept is too soon. Mr. Black is not an ordinary first year, Dumbledore replied gently. The power he commands and the maturity of his mind already exceed his years. He's still a child, she said firmly. 11 years old. No matter how clever or capable he is, he's still 11. 12, Dumbledore corrected quietly. She ignored that. And that is precisely why we must guide him, not limit him, he said. If he is already walking a certain path, and we blindfold him because he's too young, what then? He will explore alone. He may take a wrong turn. He may collide with dangers we could have helped him avoid. His fingers traced the rim of his teacup. I'm not suggesting we indulge him without restraint. I mean that when he asks, we give him the right answers. As for which path he chooses, that will always be his decision. She said nothing. Her gaze drifted deeper into the greenhouse, to the plants stretching their leaves beneath enchanted lamps. She remembered her first year as a professor. A Hufflepuff student, gifted and genuinely passionate about herbology, had tried repeatedly to skip the basics and dive into advanced study. She had stopped him several times. Eventually, he experimented in secret. The accident had been severe enough to force him to withdraw for a year. Overprotection could become shackles. Unchecked freedom could become danger. The line between them was never clear. There's more than one dark attribute plant, she said at last, her voice lower now, as if conceding ground. Dumbledore smiled at her warmly, at the colleague who had stood beside him for 20 years. She always understood. And when she did, she helped. Chapter 107, Wand Materials. Morning Willow. Its branches secrete corrosive sap the moment they touch living flesh. The sap carries a despair so concentrated it's hard to say whether it rivals a Dementor or surpasses it. Bloodthorn vine grows in battlefields and massacre sites, feeding on the lingering negative magic in the soil. Its blossoms release hallucinogenic pollen that forces people to relive the moment of death again and again. If someone truly believes they've died, they die. And the wailing mushroom. It appears only in places marked by large numbers of unnatural deaths. When mature, it emits a sound like a dying lament. Anyone who hears it teeters on the brink of death. With each example, Dumbledore inclined his head. But I won't tell him about those, Professor Sprout said, her tone shifting. If he asks, I'll speak only of the sunlight ebony bush. At least that path leads upward. Dumbledore's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He lifted his teacup and took a quiet sip, his gaze drifting elsewhere. After a moment, he looked back at her. The resolve in her eyes hadn't changed. He sighed softly and rose to his feet. The hem of his robe brushed the wicker chair. A trace of resignation flickered in his blue eyes. He knew this colleague of 20 years well enough to recognize when she would not yield. I understand, Pomona. We each care for our students in our own way. He paused. I only hope that when Mr. Black comes to you again, you'll trust him a little more. After Dumbledore left, Professor Sprout remained seated for a long time. She was not merely a professor tending plants in a greenhouse. She was head of Hufflepuff. She attended staff meetings, graded essays, handled the small but crucial matters that held a house together. A family crisis. A child being isolated. Someone secretly dabbling in dangerous magic. Hufflepuffs were often gentle and slow to anger, but when that temperament twisted into something extreme, the consequences could be severe. She also knew what was happening beyond the castle walls. Pureblood families choosing sides. Voldemort's influence spreading. The Daily Prophet publishing rhetoric that grew sharper by the week. She understood what the name Black represented. Still, her way had never been to interfere directly. She cultivated her plants. Taught her classes. Offered a cup of hot tea when needed, or listened patiently while a student complained for 10 minutes. Years later, some would write back. Professor, what you said that day helped more than you know. That was enough. She understood Albus's approach. She accepted it. Not entirely, but enough. She would follow her own way. After dinner, Regulus headed to the library. Cuthbert and Alex walked behind him in silence, their steps oddly in sync. His brow lifted slightly. Last term they had forced themselves to accompany him a few times, then gradually stopped. He knew why Cuthbert followed now. After the astronomy tower, the idea of we had taken on substance. Once you've faced something like that together, going back to separate routines feels wrong. The library wasn't just about studying. It was reassurance. Proof that the small group still existed, that he still belonged. Cuthbert might not have the words for it, but his actions said enough. Alex was much the same. Being protected had left a deeper mark than he realized, and it had turned into a clumsy kind of loyalty. Regulus didn't object. Wanting to learn was always a good sign, whatever the motive. Once you sit down at a desk and open a book, the time is never wasted. He could tolerate arrogance, hypocrisy, cowardice, selfishness, cruelty, brilliance, or weakness. He would not tolerate ignorance. That was the baseline. The three of them chose a long table by the window. Regulus opened the copy of an introduction to wand materials he hadn't finished the day before. Cuthbert grabbed a history of medieval wizarding duels. Alex hesitated before selecting a practical guide to common magical creatures. For the first 20 minutes, the library remained quiet except for the rustle of pages and the scratch of quills across parchment. Regulus had expected Cuthbert to grow restless first. Instead, it was Alex. He shifted in his chair, his eyes drifting from the page to the entrance, then back again. The third time his gaze lingered, he nudged Cuthbert with his elbow. Cuthbert had been studying an illustration of two medieval wizards dueling with spells long since banned. The scene looked spectacular, though entirely impractical. The interruption made him frown. He shot Alex a glare that clearly said this better be worth it. Alex didn't speak. He tilted his eyes toward the doorway. Cuthbert followed his line of sight. Lily Evans stood at the front desk, speaking with Madame Pants. The red-haired girl faced slightly away from them, several thick books cradled in her arms. A smudge of ink stained the cuff of her sleeve. Cuthbert's first instinct was to curl his lip. As someone raised in a pure-blood family, disdain for Muggleborns had once come as naturally as breathing. But just as the expression began to form, he caught sight of Regulus from the corner of his eye. For reasons he might not have been able to explain, he swallowed it. Instead, he tapped his knee lightly against the table and inclined his chin toward Regulus. Regulus looked up from his book. Evans is here, Cuthbert murmured. Without waiting for a response, he closed his book and stood, dragging Alex up with him. Alex stumbled but hurriedly stuffed his things into his bag. They headed toward the exit. As they passed Lily, Cuthbert didn't slow down. He merely angled his head in her direction, the gesture subtle enough to be almost invisible. Half a step behind, Alex offered her a slightly stiff smile. "Miss Evans." Lily turned, surprised. By the time she opened her mouth to reply, the two Slytherins were already gone. She glanced at their retreating backs, then toward where Regulus sat deeper in the library. Understanding dawned on her face. He must have said something. She approached the table and took the seat opposite him. Her bag landed on the wood with a soft thud. "Good evening," Regulus said, lifting his head. "Good evening," Lily replied. She drew out reference books for her potions essay. For the next half hour, neither spoke. The library held only the occasional cough from distant students and the faint swish of Madame Pance's feather duster against the shelves. Regulus was reading about wand materials. An introduction to wand materials was exactly what it claimed to be. Basic. It listed far more than it analyzed. According to the text, about 30 types of wood were commonly used in British wand making, and even fewer core materials. Phoenix feather. Dragon heartstring. Unicorn hair. A handful of other magical creature fibers and nerves. Each entry included a short description. Holly symbolized purity and protection, suited to upright witches and wizards. Yew was linked to the boundary between life and death, often chosen by those who walked perilous magical paths. Phoenix feather cores were powerful but temperamental. Dragon heartstring favored aggressive spell work. Unicorn hair offered stability but limited growth. Regulus turned the page and paused at the heading, "The British Tradition of Wand Making." There it was. The problem. Too shallow. The book told you what traits materials possessed. It did not tell you why. Why did phoenix feather contain such potent magic? Why did dragon heartstring enhance offensive spells? How did magic conduct itself through the fibers of wand wood? What mechanism allowed different cores to resonate with a wizard's magic? No answers. Or perhaps the answers existed, locked away within a handful of wand-making families. Ollivander was the most famous among them. The narrow shop in Diagon Alley. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. The air thick with wood shavings and drifting magical dust. When Garrick Ollivander had chosen his wand, he'd spoken at length. He had said Regulus would accomplish great things. Regulus did not doubt Ollivander's skill. To select the right wand from thousands within minutes required a kind of magic in itself. It simply felt like a waste. British wand making was nearly monopolized by the Ollivander family. Other traditions existed like Thunderbird tail feather cores in America. They were present, but rarely seen. Not mainstream. Diversity was fading. Wizards had grown comfortable with the mystique of the wand chooses the wizard, no longer questioning the principles beneath it. Wand lore had become an empirical art. Its core knowledge sealed within family inheritance. Outsiders learned only the surface. He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. Chapter 108, Dad Mode Regulus Bonus. There were still 30 minutes before the library closed. By habit, this was usually when she and Regulus drifted away from homework and into other topics. A kind of break. A kind of information exchange. More or less. Lily was the one who spoke first. She lifted her head, leaned forward, and rested her upper body against the table. Her green eyes fixed on him. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's a girl in our dorm. Marcia Folly. Do you know her?" Regulus searched his memory. Pure blood family. The Follies had only one daughter this generation. He had seen her at a banquet last year, sitting quietly beside her mother. "I know of her." He met Lily's gaze and caught the faint, distinctly teenage frustration in her expression. He found it unexpectedly amusing. "She's not a bad person," Lily added quickly, straightening a little. Her tone turned serious. "Really? She's never said mood blood. She's never brought up blood status. But she's always showing off." "Showing off what?" Regulus asked. "Everything." Lily spread her hands, caught somewhere between exasperation and reluctant amusement. "Today she talks about how her family keeps a jobberknoll, how beautiful its feathers are, how extraordinary its cry is. Tomorrow she mentions some little family charm her mother taught her that turns ink into rainbow colors. Then the day after, it's a 16th century magical poetry collection her grandfather gave her. How old the parchment is. How exquisite the illustrations are." Regulus listened, his expression softening slightly. I don't hate her, Lily said, twisting a strand of red hair around her finger. Those things do sound interesting. I just don't know how to respond. Do I say, that's amazing? That sounds fake. Do I say, can I see it? She's not going to bring it to school. And the way she says it. I know she's not bragging. It's more like she's sharing. But it still feels like, this is something only my family has. Regulus considered for a few seconds. She might just be trying to be your friend. Using the only method she knows. Lily tilted her head. What do you mean? Pureblood children, especially girls, are trained early in social etiquette. How to speak. How to give gifts. How to display family heritage while maintaining proper distance. Marcia Folly was probably taught to demonstrate her strengths at appropriate moments. To attract potential allies. His tone was calm and measured. The problem is, her strengths might not mean much to you. The jobberknoll may be beautiful, but you've never seen it. A family charm might be impressive, but you can't learn it. An old book might be precious, but you'll never touch it. So what am I supposed to do? Lily asked. Nothing, Regulus said. Let her talk. Ask a question occasionally. Show that you're listening. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. Sometimes you really sound like an adult. He gave a small shrug, neither dismissive nor smug, as if to say take it as you like. She propped her chin on her hand. Do you think pureblood families, even if they want to be friends with Muggleborns, can only use their own methods? They won't adapt. Regulus looked at her steadily. Would you learn pureblood etiquette just to befriend Marcia? Memorize genealogies. Study family crests. Learn how to hold a teacup just so. Lower your voice in that affected way. Lily opened her mouth, then closed it. See. Regulus spread his hands. You wouldn't. So why expect her to adapt to you? Because her family is influential? Because she ought to be more tolerant? That's not what I meant. Lily's voice softened. But when she thought about it, she realized she hadn't demanded anything of Marcia at all. Regulus had just asked the questions. Her confidence returned. She shot him an annoyed look. I know, Regulus said gently. My point is, friendship goes both ways. If you get along, talk more. If you don't, keep a polite distance. Blood status and family background are context. Real friendship doesn't rest on those. You don't have to like the way she shares things. You don't have to force yourself to accept it. You just have to decide whether she's someone worth your time. Lily stared at him for so long he wondered if he had overstepped. Then she smiled. Sometimes I seriously doubt you're only 11. I'm 12, Regulus corrected calmly. That's worse, she muttered, laughing under her breath. They returned to their books. When the closing bell rang, Madame Pants began her patrol, ushering students toward the door. Regulus and Lily packed their things and left together. At the fork where the corridor split toward the dungeons and the towers, Lily stopped. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. He inclined his head and turned toward the Slytherin common room. After a few steps, her voice followed him. Regulus. He looked back. You too. She stood in the shadow near the staircase, her green eyes bright in the dim light. If you ever feel like showing off something, like a new spell you've mastered, just say it. I won't think you're bragging. He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. I will. He continued down the corridor, the hem of his black robes brushing the stone steps, his footsteps echoing in steady rhythm. When Lily pushed open the dormitory door, Marcia Folly was sitting on her bed, a book with a dark green cover resting in her hands. She looked up, her expression caught somewhere between anticipation and hesitation. Good evening, Marcia, Lily said first, hanging her bag on the bedpost. Good evening, Lily. Marcia's voice was soft. She closed her book and ran her fingers over the cover. Lily turned toward her casually. By the way, that jobberknoll you mentioned before. What does it actually look like? I've only seen the illustration in our textbook. It moves, but it's not very clear. Marcia's eyes lit up. She leaned forward slightly, placing the book on her lap and gesturing with both hands. It's about this big. Smaller than a regular crow. The feathers are deep blue, but in moonlight they shimmer silver. Her voice dropped to something almost conspiratorial. The most special part is its cry. People say a jobberknoll's wail is prophetic. That anyone who hears it will soon die. But that's not quite true. The cry responds to impending sorrow, disaster, or death. It only sounds when a living creature nearby is on the brink of death, or when a great tragedy is about to occur. Over time, people misunderstood it. They thought the cry caused death. Lily sat on the edge of her bed and listened. The one at my house is called Sylvie. My grandfather gave her to me for my 5th birthday, Marcia continued, speaking faster now. She's clever. She can recognize everyone's footsteps. When my father comes home from work, she flies to the perch in the entry hall before he even opens the door. But she's picky about food. She only eats a certain kind of magical nut imported from France. And 3 times a week she needs fresh rootless grass juice. She talked about how Sylvie would fly to her shoulder and nudge her cheek when she was upset. About how last winter, when Sylvie fell ill, she had sat by the fireplace all night holding her. As Lily listened, she thought of Regulus's words. Marcia wasn't showing off. She was sharing, in the only way she knew how. Sharing the parts of her life that were precious, unique, perhaps a little childish, but real. This pure-blood girl was reaching out to a Muggle-born friend in a careful, awkward way, cracking her world open just a little. Realizing that, Lily felt something complicated stir in her chest. Friendship should be simpler than this. Marcia suddenly stopped, her cheeks faintly pink. Am I talking too much? No. Lily shook her head and smiled. It's interesting. I've never had a magical pet. My sister Petunia always wanted a cat, but my mum's allergic. Marcia's shoulders relaxed. After a moment of hesitation, she patted the space beside her. Do you want to sit here? I have some sweets from home. From Honeydukes. You probably haven't tried them. Lily crossed over and sat down. Marcia opened a lacquered box on her bedside table and took out several beautifully wrapped candies. They were delicious. A crisp sugar shell on the outside, and inside a flowing honey filling with a hint of mint. They sat shoulder to shoulder, eating quietly for a while. Thank you, Lily, Marcia said suddenly, her voice small. For what? For listening. She stared at the candy wrapper in her hands. Most people aren't very interested. Marcia had tried to make friends the way she had been taught, only to find that those methods didn't quite work with Lily. She didn't know what else to do, so she kept repeating what she knew. You can talk more next time, Lily said sincerely. About Sylvie. Or anything else. I like hearing about it. Marcia turned to look at her, her eyes bright in the dim dormitory light. She nodded firmly. Lily thought of Regulus again. He always saw things from a different angle. And he was usually right. She let out a small laugh. Marcia blinked at her. What is it? Chapter 109, Movement Magic. Cuthbert and Alex were at the small table by the window playing wizard chess when Regulus returned to the Slytherin dormitory. The board had clearly reached a stalemate. Both of them sat hunched over the pieces, brows furrowed in concentration. Cuthbert's queen was berating Cuthbert. Alex's king was berating Alex. The door creaked open. Both looked up at the same time, glanced at him, then dropped their gazes back to the board in perfect unison. Nothing overtly suspicious about it. And yet somehow that made it worse. Regulus ignored them. He was only here to wait for Madame Pans to finish closing up the library before heading to the restricted section. He'd barely sat down when a string of profanity erupted from the chessboard, courtesy of the king. The language was crude enough to suggest this wasn't a set marketed toward young wizards. Then Cuthbert spoke, hesitant. About that thing. Regulus looked up. What happened last time? Can I tell my family? Regulus knew he meant the astronomy tower. He tilted his chin slightly, signaling Cuthbert to go on. I promised you I wouldn't tell anyone. Cuthbert's thumb traced the carved mane of a knight piece. But I've been thinking. It involves the McNairs and the Mulcibers. Hermes was badly hurt, that place was dangerous, and there has to be something behind it that we don't understand. I think my family should know. His expression was serious, his tone careful, asking rather than telling. In the days since, the reality had sunk in. He might have stumbled into the crossfire of some game being played between pure-blood families. His instinct was to go to his own family for guidance, or at the very least, to report what had happened. But he remembered the promise he'd made, so he was asking first. Regulus studied him. Cuthbert was right. The Averys should know. And so should the Rosiers. Even as a branch family, the Rosiers were unlikely to involve themselves directly, but being informed was a different matter entirely. And Regulus was thinking further ahead. If Voldemort's shadow really did lurk behind the astronomy tower incident, then the simple fact that Cuthbert had been involved and walked away unscathed could influence how the Avery family positioned itself in the future. He glanced at Alex. "Tell them when you go home for Easter," Regulus said, his voice even. "Don't write it in a letter. Say it in person." Cuthbert nodded. Alex followed suit. "There are things you don't know," Regulus continued. "For example, Abro's Mulciber was fully aware that Darren McNair was the one who hurt Hermes. He knew, and instead of exposing him, he helped cover it up." Cuthbert's eyes went wide. "Why?" Alex whispered. "I can't tell you the specifics," Regulus said. "If Mr. Avery and Mr. Rosier want answers, they can inquire through the House of Black." Neither of them knew what had actually happened. They didn't know what Abro's shifting behavior meant, and they certainly didn't know what lay hidden behind the stone door. But once they told their parents, Mr. Cuthbert and Mr. Rosier would understand there was something deeper at play. The key information rested with Regulus. If they wanted it, they'd have to come through him, or through the Blacks. Cuthbert and Alex exchanged a look but asked nothing more. The astronomy tower incident had built a deep trust in Regulus. If he said he couldn't tell them, then he had his reasons. Silence held for a few seconds. Cuthbert's throat bobbed as he swallowed, and the words slipped out before he could stop them. "Regulus, that Evans girl." Regulus raised his eyes. His face was blank, but his gaze settled directly on Cuthbert's. The words died in Cuthbert's throat. His mouth opened, then closed. Finally he turned away, pretending to study some irrelevant piece on the board. Alex shook beside them, shoulders trembling with barely suppressed laughter. Regulus didn't bother with either of them. He stood, slid his wand into the inner pocket of his robes, and pushed through the dormitory door. As it clicked shut behind him, he heard a burst of laughter, equal parts embarrassment and curiosity. The corridors of Hogwarts lay empty and silent in the deep hours of night. Regulus moved along the wall under a refined disillusionment charm, his body blending seamlessly with his surroundings. The astronomy tower had made two problems impossible to ignore. Against sustained, wide-area attacks, he lacked any efficient means of answering in kind. And in enclosed spaces where apparition was blocked, his mobility was dangerously limited. Fiend fire, the kind of magic that consumed everything in its path, the cost of losing control wasn't something he cared to pay. But he understood its principles well enough that if the moment demanded it, he could cast it. Other ideas were taking shape too, with clearer targets in mind. The mobility problem, though, needed solving now. Space warp was still immature. His Patronus couldn't carry him yet. Apparition could be shut down by anti-apparition wards. He needed a way to move fast that didn't rely on spatial magic. Physically, the ongoing refinement of star-guided meditation had pushed his body well beyond what any young wizard could match, and past most adults too. If someone assumed that neutralizing his spell casting would be enough to subdue him, they'd learn a painful lesson. But raw physical speed had a ceiling. To control a fight, he needed magic. Deep in the restricted section, dust coated the shelves along the far wall. Regulus ran his fingers along the spines, extending his magical perception outward. Early on, this method of reading had been brutally taxing on the mind. Now he could sustain it for a full hour without noticeable fatigue. He found several books that looked promising. Wizard Mobility Tactics, From Basic to Advanced, written by an 18th century Auror commander. It documented in detail how to leverage terrain and spell combinations to maintain a movement advantage in live combat. A theoretical work on non-spatial displacement magic. Dry, but thorough. Regulus started with the first book. It outlined several spells. The Swiftness spell dramatically increased the caster's movement speed after activation, similar to an enhanced sprint. A faint white glow would coat the body, and at full speed the caster could leave after images. Pure speed augmentation, nothing more. The caster still ran on their own legs. Anti-apparition wards couldn't touch it. The sprint spell was originally a deceleration charm. Cast in reverse, it enabled inertia-free dashing, rapid acceleration, sharp turns, no risk of losing control at high speed. Tactically versatile, ideal for short-range breakthroughs, and compatible with shield charms. Anti-apparition wards had no effect on it. The side shift spell was a simplified version of apparition. No full apparition required, just a short-range lateral displacement. Agile enough for dodging attacks. Low magical cost, but couldn't be used in rapid succession. Best suited for quick repositioning mid-combat. Anti-apparition wards could suppress it, but only weakly. The flight spell built on the principles of object levitation. At an advanced level, it could be applied to the caster's own body for short-range flight or gliding. By modulating magical output, the caster could move slowly or cross obstacles without a broom or any other tool. Slow, with no offensive capability, but useful for low-altitude movement, clearing trenches, or scaling walls. Regulus committed the principles and wand movements to memory and closed the book. Every one of them had its uses. Every one of them had obvious flaws. The swiftness spell was just running. The sprint spell was short range. The side shift spell was short range with a cooldown. The flight spell was slow. He needed something more comprehensive. Dash. The room of requirement answered his need, reshaping itself into a vast training space. Dark wooden floorboards stretched across the ground. The ceiling soared so high it vanished into shadow. Clusters of magical light hovered in the air above, casting an even, steady glow. Regulus started with the simplest option, the swiftness spell. Wand pointed at himself, he spoke the incantation. Seal Redus. Magic poured from the wand tip and flooded through his body. A faint white luminescence rose from his skin, but there was no other sensation. He took one step forward. His body launched like something spring-loaded, covering 10 meters in an instant. Impressive burst speed, but at its core it was still running. Turns and sudden stops were limited. Next, the sprint spell. His wand traced a specific pattern. Momentum arresto. He stepped forward and his body began to glide, accelerating steadily. The straight-line sprint was solid. He tried a turn and found the handling responsive, but the range was disappointing. Less than 10 meters before he came to a stop. He picked a point 10 meters out, focused, gathered his magic, and flicked his wand and used side shift spell. His body materialized at the target position. The side shift spell was the most stable of the group. Smooth execution, almost no discomfort. He tested it several times in succession and found the maximum effective range was roughly 15 meters. Beyond that, the success rate dropped sharply. Each use also required about 2 seconds of cooldown. Then again, this was Hogwarts. There was hardly a stronger anti-apparition ward anywhere in the wizarding world. The results would likely be better outside these walls. The flight spell was the most awkward. His body hovered half a meter off the ground, propelled forward by directed magical force slowly. Turning and braking both demanded precise control over his magic output, and the slightest lapse sent him off balance. The mental effort of adjusting his posture in midair cost roughly 3 times what ground movement did. Regulus stood in the center of the training floor and reviewed each spell's strengths and weaknesses. The swiftness spell had explosive speed, but it was still legs. The sprint spell was fast in a straight line, but short range. The side shift spell was agile, but short range with a cooldown on top of it. The flight spell worked on any terrain, but was hard to control. Best for crossing obstacles or gaining a height advantage. Used alone, each had clear limitations. But what if he combined them? Chapter 110, Practice Time Bonus. Regulus stood still, running the choreography in his head. During the side shift spell's 2-second cooldown, maintain speed with the swiftness spell. On a straight path, switch to the sprint spell for acceleration. Need to turn or brake hard. Cut back to swiftness. Hit an obstacle or need a vantage point, trigger the flight spell to clear it, then immediately chain into a side shift on landing to reposition. The key was the transitions. Switching between spells took time. Even a fraction of a second could be fatal in a fight. He needed to drill the changeovers into instinct, so his body was already channeling the next spell's magic before the current one faded. This wasn't inventing new magic. He was combining old tools into a single workflow. His mind drifted to Voldemort's unaided flight. That magic moved like smoke through the air. No broom, no thestral, operating on principles that defied everything known about flight magic. The first time Voldemort used it, members of the Order of the Phoenix had been stunned. It shattered their understanding of what magic could do. Moody had spent a lifetime on the front lines against dark wizards. His experience was second to none. He'd been stunned too. Then he'd died. Every Death Eater, even core members like Bellatrix and Barty Jr., still relied on brooms. None of them could replicate Voldemort's unaided flight. Someone stated that only a select few Inner Circle members had been taught, but in practice the only one who'd mastered it was Snape. Voldemort had deliberately monopolized the magic, treating it as an exclusive privilege reserved for his most trusted. Snape's ability to learn it was partly talent and partly a demonstration of Voldemort's trust. Regulus didn't doubt he could learn it. If Snape could manage it, there was no reason he couldn't. The problem was getting Voldemort to teach him. Or getting Snape to. Too distant a goal for now, but not impossible down the line. Or he could develop it himself. Regulus pulled his thoughts back. Wand up. First attempt. The side shift spell ended, his body materialized 10 meters away, but his magic didn't begin activating the swiftness spell until after he'd landed. That half-second delay was enough for an opponent to finish a killing curse. Second attempt went better. While the side shift was still in effect, he'd already begun channeling the swiftness spell's magic. The moment his feet touched down, his speed kicked in. But when he tried to pivot and switch to the sprint spell, his magic couldn't keep up. He nearly slammed into a wall. Third try. Then fourth. Fifth. The spells themselves weren't hard. The swiftness spell was fast running. The sprint spell was a gliding acceleration. The side shift spell was a short-range blink. The flight spell was a low hover. None of them demanded extraordinary power. What was hard was using the right spell at the right time with no gaps in between. But for Regulus, this didn't qualify as difficult. His magical perception was refined enough to pinpoint the exact moment each spell activated and the precise instant it began to fade. His mind could simultaneously process movement path prediction, spell switch preparation, and magic output adjustment. 3 things at once. Like playing 3 games of wizard chess simultaneously. Most people would find it overwhelming. For him, it was routine practice. An hour in, he was moving fluidly through the training space. Side shift into a swiftness sprint. Hard stop, cut to sprint spell for a direction change. Simulated low wall ahead, flight spell to clear it. The instant he landed, another side shift to open distance. Faster and faster, the transitions growing smoother. A flash of white light across his skin was the swiftness spell. Feet tracing arcs across the floor was the sprint spell. A figure blurring out and snapping back into focus was the side shift. A body lifting briefly from the ground was the flight spell. 4 effects cycling in rotation, the pauses between them shrinking to almost nothing. But the system had its ceiling. In a situation like the astronomy tower corridor, completely surrounded with nowhere to hide in tight quarters, no amount of agility could dodge every attack. What it improved was mobility. As long as he never got boxed in like that again, it would serve him well enough. And most wizarding combat came down to opponents, not killing fields. Regulus stopped. Breathing steady, energy expenditure minimal. It occurred to him that combat wizards must have studied all of this. Professor Flitwick was a former dueling champion. Had he won those titles by footwork alone? Aurors and hit wizards facing dark wizards couldn't rely solely on apparition. Anti-apparition wards weren't rare. Surviving real combat meant mastering multiple means of movement. He'd genuinely overlooked this area, too focused on advanced magic, forgetting that practical combat foundations were often built from ordinary techniques. His father Orion had never brought it up. Perhaps he'd thought it was too early, or perhaps he'd wanted Regulus to figure it out on his own. At least he'd filled the gap himself. He exited the room of requirement and stepped back in, this time with a combat environment in mind. The room answered. The training floor transformed into something resembling ruins, cracked stone pillars, collapsed walls, craters, and debris scattered across the ground. 16 training dummies stood distributed among the wreckage. They could move. Each gripped a practice wand, and the tips began gathering magic. Regulus tightened his grip on his wand. The first dummy fired a bolt of red light. Knock back Jinx. He triggered the side shift spell, displacing 3 meters to the left. The curse grazed past his shoulder. The swiftness spell activated the instant he landed, propelling him behind the nearest stone pillar. A second dummy's spell chased him. The sprint spell engaged, carrying him through a gliding turn in the narrow gap between columns. The curse struck stone and sprayed fragments. A third dummy cut in from the flank. Flight spell. His body lifted half a meter, clearing a section of ruined wall. Midair, a fourth dummy's spell streaked toward him. His side shift cooldown had just reset. His figure vanished, reappearing 5 meters away behind cover. Spells came from every direction. He kept moving, weaving, and dodging through the ruins. Side shift to evade lethal shots. Swiftness to close distance or pull back. Sprint spell to thread through complex terrain. Flight spell to vault obstacles. 4 spells in rotation, the rhythm stabilizing, settling into a pattern. Physical strain was real. High-speed movement generated inertia, and sudden stops and sharp turns hammered his muscles and joints. But a body tempered by star-guided meditation could handle it, and his magical reserve stayed within manageable limits. 40 minutes of continuous movement before his breathing grew even slightly uneven. The dummies ceased fire. The training ground fell quiet. Regulus lowered his wand. The system worked. Not perfect yet, but functional. The rest was refinement through live combat, adjusting spell order and timing to fit specific situations. But he was clear about its limitations. At the end of the day, he was still a grounded chicken. The flight spell could get him off the ground, but at its speed, he'd never dare go high. No cover in the air, slow movement, and the moment concentrated fire found him, he'd be a sitting target. This kind of flight was only good for clearing obstacles. It couldn't serve as a primary means of movement. What he needed was true flight magic. No broom, no magical creature, just his own power carrying him freely through the sky. Voldemort's unaided flight was the ideal. Devastating results. But Regulus had no reason to know the magic existed, and he certainly couldn't reveal any desire to learn it. Showing that kind of need to Voldemort was dangerous. Regulus was entirely certain that if he asked, the Dark Lord would be happy to teach him. And then the knowledge would become leverage, and he'd be expected to pay for it. He couldn't help turning over the magic's underlying principles. Why did it work? Was it dark magic? Possibly. Most of Voldemort's spell work was rooted in the dark arts, or more precisely, outside of his younger years, few had ever seen him cast anything else. But not necessarily. Some powerful magic was merely difficult, not inherently evil. Even Voldemort had to know legitimate magic beyond the dark arts, and his mastery there would run deep as well. Perhaps he'd fused elements from different magical disciplines into something entirely new. Regulus didn't have answers. He didn't even have enough information to speculate properly. He'd never witnessed the effect firsthand, didn't know the spell's structure, and couldn't even confirm whether it required a fixed wand movement. All he could do was file the thoughts away. But the seed had been planted. Walking back from the room of requirement, his mind was still optimizing details. Could he chain 2 side shifts back to back? Could the cooldown be masked by layering another spell's effect over the gap? Back in the dormitory, Cuthbert and Alex were already asleep. Steady breathing drifted from behind their bed curtains. Regulus lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Saturday. 10 in the morning, a meeting with Dumbledore in the Headmaster's office. The conversation beneath the astronomy tower had been rushed, improvised. This time would be the real one. What would Dumbledore ask? His ideals? His path? The future? His choices? He didn't know, but he wasn't particularly worried. Between the astronomy tower incident and his frequent visits to the restricted section, Dumbledore's stance had been clear enough. He'd chosen not to intervene, but he would nudge things in the right direction when the moment called for it. If Dumbledore truly intended to control or restrict him. In the darkness, the slightest hint of a smile touched Regulus's face. There wasn't much he could do about it. He could hardly drop out. But the odds of that were low. Chapter 111, My Soul is Pure and Warm. At 9:50 on Saturday morning, Regulus stood before the stone gargoyle on the 8th floor. Regulus knew a password was required, but Dumbledore hadn't given him one. He waited a few seconds. The gargoyle stirred on its own, stone joints grinding with a low, heavy scrape. It hopped aside, and the wall behind it rotated open to reveal a spiraling staircase. The stairs turned upward of their own accord. Regulus stepped on and let them carry him up until they stopped before a heavy oak door. A brass knocker shaped like a griffin hung at its center. He knocked 3 times. The door swung open by itself. The headmaster's office was a spacious, circular room. Portraits lined the walls, former headmasters of Hogwarts sitting or standing in their frames. Some read books, some dozed, and some watched Regulus enter with open curiosity. Below the frames ran dark wooden shelves packed with heavy tomes and instruments. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface buried under parchment, ink bottles, several intricate mechanical devices, and a crystal ball giving off a thin curl of steam. By the window stood a tall gilded perch, and on it sat the phoenix fox. When Regulus entered, Fox turned to look at him. Dark, bright eyes reflected his silhouette. The phoenix let out a soft call, clear and ringing, like a bell struck once. The air held a layered scent, the mustiness of old books, the dry bite of parchment, something sickeningly sweet from candy, and beneath it all a faint trace like singed feathers. And magic. The room smelled of magic. Regulus's gaze swept the portraits along the wall and quickly found the one he was looking for. Phineas Regulus Black. His great-great-grandfather. One of the least popular headmasters in Hogwarts history, a wizard who had managed the unprecedented feat of uniting all four houses, against himself. Phineas sat in an armchair inside his frame, holding a copy of the Daily Prophet from some indeterminate era, his eyes peering over the top of the newspaper at Regulus. Their gazes met. Phineas gave the faintest nod, so slight it was nearly invisible. He said nothing, lifted the newspaper higher, and hid behind it. Regulus understood. These headmaster portraits were sustained by the castle's own magic. As long as Hogwarts stood, they would endure. They could travel between connected frames throughout the castle, seeing and hearing a great deal. Phineas certainly knew about the astronomy tower incident. He might know even more than Dumbledore, because there was a matching portrait of him at the Black residence. Both frames were his territory. But Phineas had clearly said nothing. Family interests above all else. Even in death, reduced to pigment and enchantment, he was still a Black. With one condition, of course, nothing that endangered Hogwarts. Regulus received the signal. He understood. Dumbledore wouldn't make things difficult for him. Behind the desk, Dumbledore looked up from a pile of documents. Today he wore deep blue robes embroidered with silver stars. Behind his half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes were warm and bright. "Ah, Mr. Black. Right on time." Dumbledore rose and came around the desk. "Please, sit." Regulus settled into the armchair across from the desk. The cushion was soft, the armrests carved with elaborate patterns. "Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore," he said politely. Dumbledore returned to his seat and picked up a jar from a silver tray on the desk. "Sherbet lemon? Cockroach clusters? Or perhaps some fizzing whiz-bees?" He opened the jar, revealing an assortment of brightly colored sweets. The cockroach clusters stood out among them. They were genuinely squirming, packed together in a dense, writhing mass, producing that faint rustling sound unique to arthropods in motion. Regulus looked at the writhing candy. 2 seconds of silence passed. He couldn't resist. "Headmaster, I have a question." "Please, ask." "When you eat cockroach clusters, do you check first to make sure a real cockroach hasn't gotten mixed in?" Dumbledore's hand froze in midair, jar and all. He blinked. Looked at the jar. Looked at Regulus. Looked at the jar again. Then, slowly, he set it down. His fingers stroked his beard once, and his gaze drifted sideways. His eyes wandered elsewhere. "That is, an interesting question." He considered it for several seconds, his expression as serious as if he were puzzling through the principles of some complex enchantment. In the end, he decided to move on and pushed the jar aside. But Regulus noticed that Dumbledore's crooked nose seemed to have gotten slightly more crooked. Perhaps tea would be better today. Dumbledore waved a hand, and a teapot appeared on the desk with 2 cups. The pot tilted on its own, pouring steaming red tea. "Sugar? Milk? Plain is fine, thank you." Regulus took the cup. Under cover of drinking, his eyes made a quick sweep of the room. The portraits observed in silence. Fox preened on his perch. Through the window, the sky stretched a clean blue, the outlines of the Black Lake and the Forbidden Forest visible in the distance. Dumbledore sipped his tea. The cup clinked softly against the saucer as he set it down. He leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the desk. "First, Regulus, may I call you that?" "Of course, Headmaster." "Good." A smile. "Though I do prefer when students call me Professor. The title of Headmaster always makes things feel a bit distant." Something shifted in Regulus's mind. Professor. A more intimate address, more like a conversation between teacher and student than between administrator and subject. And a professor, by definition, was someone who taught. "Professor Dumbledore," he said, adapting smoothly. The creases at the corners of Dumbledore's eyes softened, clearly pleased. There's nothing terribly serious about today's meeting, Dumbledore said, his tone easy and light. I only wanted to chat. You know how it is. As headmaster, I like to get to know my students better, especially the exceptional ones. Regulus sipped his tea and listened. You handled the astronomy tower well. Dumbledore continued, a note of genuine approval in his voice. Calm, decisive, prioritizing the safety of your companions in a crisis. That isn't easy. Many adult wizards couldn't manage it. I only did what needed to be done, Regulus said. What needed to be done? Dumbledore repeated the phrase, fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. Many people know what needs to be done. When the moment arrives, they can't follow through. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act in spite of it. His gaze settled on Regulus's face. Your Patronus is beautiful. That's quite rare. Thank you, Regulus said. Dumbledore had said this before. Bringing it up again was deliberate. And there it was. A Patronus reflects the deepest desires of the heart, Dumbledore said. His tone was conversational, but the words carried weight. The stars, freedom and exploration. A grand ambition. Regulus thanked him again and raised his teacup for another sip. What he wanted to say was, yours isn't bad either, Professor Dumbledore. Rebirth and protection. A noble ambition in its own right. The portraits on the wall held their silence, but Regulus could feel their attention. Phineas still hid behind his newspaper, though the edge had crept downward just enough to expose half of one eye. Fawkes spread his wings on the perch, gold and crimson feathers gleaming in the light. He let out another call, longer this time, carrying a cadence like music. Dumbledore looked toward the phoenix and smiled. Fawkes seems quite taken with you. Phoenixes can see the soul. They're drawn to hearts that are pure and warm. Regulus wasn't sure how to respond. The compliment felt excessive. His soul was neither particularly pure nor particularly warm. At least, that was his own assessment. As for Fawkes, perhaps birds and humans simply saw things differently. Professor, he said, opting to redirect the resentment plague wand. What became of it? Sealed. Dumbledore's answer was brief. Something like that has no business existing. The crimes Valentino Solito committed should not become a tool for future generations chasing power. His tone was calm, but Regulus could feel the weight behind the words. 70,000 people suffering. 70,000 budget dementors. Centuries of curse, all sealed away by Dumbledore with the casual finality of closing a book. That was power. Regulus studied the old man across from him. The greatest light wizard of the century. Perhaps the most powerful wizard in history, or at least among them. In the wizarding world, power was everything. It transcended political authority. It was pure, personal might. Dumbledore could have single-handedly reshaped the world order if he'd chosen to. He could have become a king, or something closer to a god. But he hadn't. He'd chosen to stay at Hogwarts as headmaster. Teaching, chatting with students, eating cockroach clusters, occasionally stepping out to deal with the wider world's problems. In the original story, Dumbledore had once said, I don't dare touch power, because I'm afraid I might come to enjoy it. Regulus didn't know what state of mind the headmaster had been in when he'd spoken those words. Perhaps it was genuine fear. Perhaps an excuse. Perhaps nothing more than a clear-eyed understanding of his own desires. But regardless, the result was the same. Dumbledore possessed the power to change the world and chose to use as little of it as possible. Regulus didn't judge whether that choice was right or wrong. Everyone had their own logic for how they lived. All that mattered was being willing to bear the consequences. Professor, he set down his teacup, you didn't ask me here today just to compliment my Patronus. Dumbledore's smile remained warm and grandfatherly, but something more serious had crept in around the edges. Regulus had the distinct impression of a fisherman who'd finally felt a tug on the line. No, I didn't, Dumbledore admitted. I have a question I'd like to ask you. You may answer it, or you may not. That's entirely up to you. Regulus sat up straight. Chapter 112, Proving the Path bonus. After Dumbledore asked his question, the office fell silent. The portraits on the wall held their breath. Some pretended to read, others feigned sleep, but every pair of eyes drifted toward the desk. Phineas Black still hid behind his daily prophet, the edge pulled low enough to expose only the tops of his eyes. Regulus didn't answer right away. He was deciding how much truth to share. This wasn't about political allegiance or picking sides. It was about the fundamental nature of magic. The man asking was Dumbledore. If Professor Flitwick could sense the changes in him, the headmaster certainly had. Deflecting or giving vague answers would be pointless, a waste of opportunity, even. But he wouldn't say everything. What he could share was direction. His understanding of what magic was at its core. The rough shape of his own path. Saying it aloud to Dumbledore was also saying it to himself. A chance to test his own thinking. He lifted his gaze and met the headmaster's eyes. At first, Regulus began, his expression settling into something still and serious. I believed magic could be completely deconstructed. Dumbledore leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers laced beneath his chin. Spatial magic has structure. Transfiguration follows patterns. Even the magical properties of plants can be classified by tendency and attribute. I thought that if I mapped the principles, ran the calculations, and maintained precise control, magic could be fully mastered. His pace was steady, unhurried. I broke spellcasting into discrete steps. Used logic to derive spell variants. I was convinced that reason could encompass all of magic. His gaze strayed briefly to the window. Beyond it, the treetops of the Forbidden Forest rolled like a dark sea in the wind. And I succeeded. There wasn't much pride in his voice, but Dumbledore caught it all the same. I'm good at it. Sensing how magic flows, calculating output intensity, adjusting precision of control. None of that is hard for me. One of the portraits muttered under its breath, another theorist. Someone next to him hissed for quiet. Regulus ignored them and continued. Until I cast my Patronus. He drew his wand and looked up at Dumbledore. The headmaster's eyebrows rose, his face settling into a look that said by all means, blue eyes bright with anticipation. Expecto Patronum. Silver-white light bloomed from the wand tip, gathering and stretching until it took the shape of the starlight kite. The Patronus circled the office once, wings scattering fine points of starlight, its clear cry ringing through the round chamber. Fawkes lifted his head from the perch. His gold and crimson feathers ruffled open, and he answered with a call of his own, warm and bright. The starlight kite glided to the phoenix's side. They regarded each other across the empty air. Two magical creatures. One real. One conjured. Fawkes tilted his head. The kite beat its wings gently. Regulus watched them and kept talking. On the cliffs in Ireland, I hadn't meant to summon it. It was the longing for freedom, the pull of a wider world. Standing there looking out at the ocean and the sky, something moved in me. The world was so vast. Magic could do so much. The starlight kite drifted back and settled on the top of his chair. That was when I understood. Magic isn't just another form of energy to be calculated, controlled, and exploited. A trace of memory softened his voice. It's alive. It shifts with the wizard's emotions. When I'm calm, it runs precise and stable. When I'm moved, it surges and brightens. Those two states don't contradict each other. He raised his left hand, palm up. A thread of silver-white magic rose from his fingertips, spinning slowly, tracing intricate geometric shapes that shifted and reformed. Magic can be precise science. Calculation, logic, rigorous derivation. He watched the strand of light. The key is how the wizard sees it. How they choose to use it. The magic dissolved. He lowered his hand. Later, Professor Flitwick told me that magic is simply there. Believe in its existence. Trust your own understanding. Trust the power of the heart. Because sometimes magic answers you when you least expect it. Not always rational, not always logical, but real. He paused, gathering his final thought. Across the desk, Dumbledore listened with full attention. Something shone in his eyes, a flicker of emotion, and he looked at Regulus the way someone looks at a reflection of their younger self. His gaze grew distant, as if reaching back through decades. Once, someone else had sat across from him like this, talking about magic, sharing how they understood it. The memory stretched on, but Regulus's voice pulled him back. The headmaster reached up and quietly brushed the corner of one eye. Now I believe magic is two parallel roads. Regulus's tone was measured and firm, the kind of certainty you could hear. On one side, the patterns that can be understood. Spatial magic, transfiguration. Things you improve through study and practice. On the other, the mystery you can't pin down. The Patronus. Things that depend on emotion, belief, the deepest longings of the soul. Things logic can never exhaust. He looked at Dumbledore. So I think magic is both a force that can be mastered and a mystery that deserves reverence. Wizards use the first to solve problems. They need the second to understand why those problems matter. He finished and waited. The office was quiet for several seconds. The portraits exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others shook their heads. Phineas Black lowered his newspaper, revealing his whole face. That expression, usually sharp with derision, held nothing now. He simply watched Regulus. Dumbledore eased back in his chair. His fingers tapped the desk twice, and then he smiled. He picked up his teacup, took a sip, and set it down again. Regulus, he said, his voice gentler than before, you've touched the essence of magic earlier than most adult wizards ever do. Regulus straightened in his seat. Too many people spend their entire lives caught on one question: should magic be analyzed, or should it be felt? Dumbledore's fingers brushed lightly through the silver beard trailing down his chest. Some cling to formulas and principles, reducing magic to cold calculation. Others lose themselves in intuition and mystery, turning magic into blind worship. They believe you can only choose one road, and once chosen, you walk it to the end. He lowered his hand, his gaze settling on Regulus's face. You've seen what they haven't. The two were never opposed. Approval filled Dumbledore's blue eyes. Reason is the skeleton of magic. It keeps you steady, carries you far, and guards you against illusion. Feeling is its flesh and blood. It keeps you warm, takes you deep, and frees you from being shackled by rules. On the wall, a portrait of a former headmistress in a curled wig murmured, like a phoenix reborn. It needs both the tempering flame and the faith to rise again. Dumbledore heard her and smiled, inclining his head in her direction. Regulus looked up as well and gave her a polite nod. Calling magic a force that can be mastered. That takes courage. Dumbledore turned back to him. Admitting it's a mystery worth revering. That takes wisdom. Many people forget reverence once they grow powerful. They want logic to conquer everything. But the most enchanting part of magic is precisely what resists analysis. The resonance between heart and power. The meeting of belief and miracle. Something subtle shifted inside Regulus as he listened. It was the feeling of walking a road alone for a long time and suddenly finding someone further ahead, someone who turned back, saw you, and said, "You're going the right way." That confirmation mattered. Even if Dumbledore had dismissed his thinking, he wouldn't have abandoned his path. He would have dug deeper, questioned harder, refined his reasoning. But recognition from the greatest wizard of the century still hit like a shot of adrenaline. He didn't desperately need it, but it was worth something. He decided to press the advantage. "Professor," Regulus said, "at the astronomy tower, you mentioned that the light only carried a touch of radiance. Could I ask what you meant by that?" Dumbledore's eyes lit up, the way they did when a student finally asked the question he'd been waiting for. "Do you believe light must defeat darkness?" he asked, the question carrying the tone of a guide rather than a challenge. "Attribute dominance." Regulus nodded. "A Patronus counters Dementors. Light magic counters dark curses. That's common knowledge. Common knowledge can narrow the view." Dumbledore leaned forward again, hands folded on the desk. "When I was young, I wanted to destroy darkness with spells, too. It took years to understand that darkness cannot be destroyed." Regulus frowned. He already knew darkness couldn't be destroyed. "Shadows always follow the light," Dumbledore continued. "But light doesn't need to chase shadows down. If the light burns bright enough, shadows lose their footing. They retreat on their own." He raised his right hand, index finger extended. A small, gentle white glow kindled at the tip, nothing like the blaze beneath the astronomy tower, but soft and steady. The glow drifted toward Regulus and settled on his wand. The tip shimmered faintly for 2 or 3 seconds, then faded. "When you used Protego to force back the grey mist, that was opposition," Dumbledore said. "If you had first let your wand become a vessel for radiance, the mist would have avoided you on its own. Light magic was never about attacking darkness. It's about refusing to be consumed by it." Regulus stared at his wand, mind racing. Opposition versus presence. Active assault versus natural repulsion. The first spent magic to cancel out negative energy. The second used the caster's own nature to create an environment where darkness simply couldn't exist. That was a higher order of magic entirely. Not brute force clashing head-on, but innate suppression at the level of fundamental nature. Chapter 113, The Space Between Spells. Magic isn't an opponent you conquer, Dumbledore's voice drew him back. Treat it as a friend. Have a conversation with it. The most powerful magic makes the world work alongside you. Makes the world work alongside you. Regulus turned the phrase over in his mind. He agreed completely. He'd reached the same conclusion on his own. A wizard's will and magic shaped the world, and the world answered in kind. The principle was sound. But Dumbledore could probably do it. He couldn't. Not yet. Not even close. Take potions as an example. Dumbledore shifted angles. Professor Slughorn teaches you to control the heat, prepare ingredients, mind the direction and number of stirs. But the finest potions, Felix Felicis among them, require a window where you let the magic ferment on its own. You can't rush it. Can't force it. You wait for every component to find its place. His fingers traced invisible circles in the air, stirring an unseen cauldron. Magic works the same way. Not every spell needs to be pushed to maximum effect. Sometimes leaving room, giving the magic space to breathe, is the higher art. Regulus thought about his own casting habits. Precise output calculations, strict effect control, every drop of magic put to its sharpest use. Nothing wrong with that. It was efficient and effective. But Dumbledore was describing another possibility. Some magic didn't need to be pushed to the brim. A little room left over could trigger effects that were more natural, more lasting. That doesn't mean doing nothing, Dumbledore continued. It means doing what needs doing, then letting things take their course. When facing darkness, the question isn't how much I can destroy. It's how much I can illuminate. Regulus sat with that in silence. The idea was abstract. He needed time to digest it. The portraits listened quietly. Phineas Black watched Dumbledore with a complicated expression. He was probably thinking, I already consider this boy devious, and you're pouring all this wisdom into him? Regulus Dumbledore, is it now? Fawkes let out a soft trill and glided down from his perch, landing on the edge of the desk. He tilted his head at Regulus, dark bright eyes reflecting the boy's silhouette. Regulus's mind wandered for a moment. Fawkes's gaze looked a lot like Dumbledore's. What I've shared today, Dumbledore leaned back, his smile warming again, is just that. Sharing. Then his tone shifted. Everyone has to find their own path in the end. Other people's experience is a reference, not a blueprint. He raised a hand. The teapot on the desk tilted of its own accord, topping off both cups with fresh hot tea. But for now, at least, I think your direction is right. He picked up his cup. Keep walking, Regulus. Bring your reason with you, and your wonder. Bring your calculations, and your reverence. Magic won't disappoint a wizard like that. Regulus lifted his own cup. The tea had cooled, but it still carried a faint fragrance as he drank. It struck him then that Dumbledore hadn't taught him a single spell today. Hadn't shared any secret knowledge. Everything he'd said was personal insight. Distilled experience. The philosophy of magic. And it was worth more than any specific spell could have been. What Dumbledore had given him was framework and his perspective. A way of understanding how magic and the world related to each other. With that, he could derive countless applications on his own. The treasure was out there. Dumbledore hadn't taken him to it, but he'd handed him a map and a compass. Thank you, Professor. The words came out solemn, and he meant every one. Dumbledore blinked, the corners of his mouth curling beneath his beard. You're welcome. His voice turned lighter. Honestly, I enjoy conversations like this. Students at Hogwarts who are ready for them, there aren't many. A portrait on the wall let out a small huff. The last one who talked like this was Dilly's. Dumbledore cut her off gently. The portrait of Headmistress Dilly's pursed her lips but said nothing more. Regulus had a fair idea who they'd actually been thinking of. Tom Riddle. He drained the last of his tea, set the cup down, and rose. I should head back, Professor. I need to sit with everything you've said. Of course. Dumbledore stood as well, coming around the desk. His tone turned wistful. You're sure you won't try a cockroach cluster? Listen, they really are. No. Regulus didn't hesitate. Dumbledore clicked his tongue. Shame. Regulus let that pass. He gave a slight bow. Thank you again, Professor. I've gained a great deal. Off you go. Dumbledore smiled. Regulus nodded, offered a small bow to the portraits along the wall, dipped his head to Fawkes in farewell, and turned for the door. His hand closed around the handle when Dumbledore's voice came from behind him. Regulus. He looked back. Remember, the headmaster said, standing where he was, eyes steady on him, whatever path you choose in the future, Hogwarts will always be your school. And school is a place where you're allowed to make mistakes. There was more in those words than their surface. Regulus heard it clearly. I understand, Professor. He pushed through the door. The spiral staircase carried him slowly downward, depositing him in the 8th floor corridor. Inside the office, Dumbledore hadn't moved. He stood watching the closed door. The portraits began murmuring among themselves, every conversation circling the Slytherin boy who'd left. Phineas Black finally set down his newspaper. You're investing a great deal in him, Albus. I invest a great deal in all my students, Phineas. Dumbledore walked back behind his desk and sat. But you don't talk to all of them this much, or this deeply. Dumbledore smiled. His hand drifted toward the cockroach clusters, hesitated, then pulled back. He plucked a sherbet lemon from the silver tray instead and popped it into his mouth. Because not all of them are ready to hear it. The candy made the words slightly muffled. Fawkes soared back to his perch, spread his wings, and let out a long, ringing call. At lunch, the great hall smelled of roast beef and mashed potatoes. Regulus sat down at the Slytherin table, fork in hand, mind still turning. He distilled Dumbledore's words down to a single point. Magic needed breathing room. Don't push to full power. Surrender a portion to magic itself. Do what needs doing, then let events unfold. He understood the logic. The question was where the balance point lay. Control came naturally to him. Leaving slack, letting magic breathe, felt like programming a precision instrument to tolerate error on purpose. But it was worth trying. Dumbledore had been at this a long time. Following in his footsteps wouldn't steer him wrong. He cut a piece of beef and chewed, eyes sweeping the hall. Gryffindor's table was the loudest. Ravenclaw ran quieter. Hufflepuff rang with scattered laughter. And here at Slytherin, the stillest of them all. Hogwarts was a good place. The professors were good people. McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, Slughorn, and now Dumbledore himself. What they'd given him went beyond spells and recipes. They'd taught him ways of seeing magic, approaches to solving problems, even lessons about what kind of person to be. He thought of Dumbledore's parting words. Whatever path you choose in the future, Hogwarts will always be your school. And school is a place where you're allowed to make mistakes. That had sounded less like advice and more like permission. Preemptive understanding, offered before it was needed. Dumbledore knew the Black family's position. The tide of pure-blood houses drifting toward Voldemort was no secret to the headmaster. And still he'd chosen to share those things with Regulus. To express approval and expectation. The reason wasn't talent alone. Deeper down, it was probably that in the long contest between Dumbledore and Voldemort, both sides had their eye on him. Seen through a rational lens, the headmaster was making an early play. An investment. Adding weight to his own side of the scale. The thought made Regulus shake his head faintly. He didn't resent being invested in. At least Dumbledore's currency was wisdom. His method was guidance. That beat most other forms of investment by a wide margin. He swallowed the last bite and took a sip of pumpkin juice. Regulus. The call came from the entrance. Cuthbert and Alex walked in, half-melted snowflakes clinging to their hair, cheeks flushed red from the cold, eyes bright. They reached the table. Cuthbert dropped onto the bench across from him. Alex was more careful, shaking the snow off his robes before sitting down. Snow's stopped, sun's out, gorgeous weather. Cuthbert grabbed a roll and stuffed it into his mouth. Want to come hang out? We could have a snowball fight, Alex added quietly. Regulus looked at them. Cuthbert's invitation was casual. Alex's suggestion was light. He knew what they were thinking. He almost never joined in things like this. Always off to the library, the room of requirement, practicing magic. To them, inviting Regulus to play was like inviting a professor to a student party. It didn't compute. They were asking just to ask. But today felt a little different. Today, he wanted to try leaving room. Not filling every hour. Not doing everything for some defined purpose. Sure, Regulus said. Cuthbert's mouth hung open, breadcrumbs stuck between his teeth. Alex looked up, eyes wide. The headmaster's office. Dumbledore stood at the window, a cup of honey tea in his hand. Below, 3 figures moved across the castle grounds. 2 ran ahead, shoving each other through the snow. The third walked at an even pace behind them, pausing now and then to look around. They reached the edge of the Black Lake, crouched by a hole in the ice, stayed for a long while, then stood and headed back. Dumbledore's lips curved upward. He raised the cup and drank. Sweetness dissolved across his tongue. He turned, walked back to the desk, and set the cup down. On his perch, Fawkes gave a quiet trill, as if saying something. "I know, Fawkes." Dumbledore's voice was soft. "Give him time. And give magic a little time, too." Chapter 114, the first spell of his own bonus. March at Hogwarts. The snow was melting, bearing patches of brown earth around the castle grounds. Regulus stood in the room of requirement, wand at his side. "Leave room. Don't push to full power." The idea had been turning in his head for 2 weeks. The principle was simple enough: do what needed doing, let magic handle the rest. But the specifics eluded him. How much room to leave? How much force to apply? No formula existed for that. He stared at the stone pedestal 3 meters ahead. A single galleon sat on its surface, the standard target for practicing space warp. The problem was obvious. Space warp lagged behind every other branch of his magic. He could move small objects now. Range had stretched to 5 meters, margin of error down to 2 centimeters, spatial friction decreasing steadily. But practical application was still far off. At minimum, he needed to move himself before he could call the technique truly mastered. His previous approach had been blunt. Lock onto the target position with spatial perception. Map the spatial structure. Calculate output and frequency through magical sensing and raw mental math. Fold the space with magic, then push the object through the resulting corridor. Every step ran on precision control and sustained output. Brute force shoving something from point A to point B. Dumbledore's words had shown him the flaw. He was forcing it. Space warp in his hands had become pure magical labor, missing the element that made magic magic. He thought of building a house. He'd been hauling bricks by hand, forgetting pulleys and scaffolding existed. Maybe space warp needed an incantation and wand movement. Not to make the magic look more like magic. He had no such vanity. He wanted to give his power a framework. A structure. A guide that told the magic what it was supposed to do. He began. First attempt. Wand raised, syllables forming in his mind. He referenced the incantation structure of apparition, the most mature spatial magic in the wizarding world. Apparition's core demanded clear destination and self-integrity. Space warp required something different, a clean path and precise coordinates. He spoke the first draft of the incantation. The wand traced its matching arc. Nothing. The galleon sat motionless. Magic swirled at the wand tip, finding no outlet. Regulus wasn't surprised. Creating a new spell was never simple. Those legends of wizards struck by sudden inspiration and conjuring new magic on the spot were almost certainly embellished by later generations. The reality was trial after trial. Adjustment, failure, another try. Minor charms could come together quickly, sure. But space warp was no minor charm. He did have advantages. Spatial perception let him watch how magic interacted with the fabric of space in real time. His control let him make fine adjustments to each attempt's effects. Most importantly, he knew what space warp was supposed to do at a fundamental level: bend a section of space so that 2 points briefly touched. Knowing the destination made the journey far more efficient than groping in the dark. He started logging data. With each attempt, he tracked how magic flowed through space. Which syllables strengthened the resonance between power and spatial structure? Which wand movements stabilized the fold? Which combinations caused turbulence? Attempt 23, the galleon wobbled. Attempt 37, the galleon vanished for half a second and reappeared 2 centimeters to the side. Attempt 52, the galleon relocated 1 meter away, landing 3 centimeters off target. He kept refining. He'd accepted that reason and intuition walked together. But at his core, he wasn't an intuitive caster. He wouldn't conjure magic through flashes of inspiration or gut feeling. His tools were data analysis and logical deduction. Every failure was a data point. Every success was validation. The process stretched across nearly 2 weeks. Every evening after classes, he stood in the room of requirement, wand moving, incantation shifting, the galleon blinking in and out of existence across the space. One night in mid-March, he stood at the center of the training floor and raised his wand. Something felt different. As the syllables formed on his lips, magic began flowing before he directed it. No forcing. No brute push. It ran along some natural pathway of its own accord. When the wand traced its arc, the spatial structure responded, opening the corridor willingly. Space warp. A silver glow kindled at the wand tip, faint, nearly transparent, but visible in the dim training room as a thin halo of light. The wand's path left ripples in the air. Space itself was flexing. The galleon vanished. No visible transit. No arc of motion. One instant on the pedestal, the next on a table 5 meters away. Dead center. Regulus stood still, staring at the coin. He flicked his wand again, targeting a heavy book this time. It disappeared from the shelf and appeared on the floor, spine up, cover down, angled exactly as he'd intended. Third test, something smaller. A silver sickle. The coin jumped 3 times in rapid succession. From the left shelf to the right table, then to the floor ahead, then back into his palm. Each jump took less than half a second. Landing error under 1 centimeter. He stopped. Breathing steady, pulse a touch faster than normal. It worked. This wasn't a rough prototype anymore. The spell was complete. Space warp was now a fully formed piece of magic, fixed incantation, standardized wand movement, a repeatable casting process. Any wizard with sufficient power, a clear head, and mastery of the incantation could theoretically learn it. He walked to the galleon and picked it up. The coin was cold, its edges worn smooth from months of use. This magic had started the day he first sensed the folds in space, progressed through reverse engineering how house elves moved, and culminated tonight in a finished spell. The better part of a year. It had finally crossed from Regulus's personal ability to teachable magic. That mattered. Not only as growth in his own power. It proved something larger, that wizards could master the spatial magic of house elves. Could even refine it, adapt it to suit human casters. He began testing limits. Range, anything within line of sight could be moved. A glass 20 meters out. A chair at 30. A map pinned to the wall at 50. Pinpoint accuracy throughout. Error grew with distance, but stayed under 5 centimeters within 50 meters. Object size had a ceiling. The largest thing he could reliably move was an armchair. Anything bigger destabilized the spatial structure and spiked his magic consumption. Sustained use had a cooldown. After each cast, space needed roughly 1 second to resettle. Past 10 consecutive casts, landing error climbed noticeably. All of it normal. Every spell had constraints. He set down his wand and tried without it. Fingers traced the pattern through the air. The incantation left his lips in a murmur. The galleon vanished and appeared 3 meters away. First try. Clean. He studied the sensation carefully. Compared to casting with a wand, the magic flowed more directly. Cost a bit more power, but result was the same. The incantation and gesture were like a key. Once the door was open, you didn't need the key anymore. The interesting part was how easy the magic had become once it had a fixed form. No loss of power, but the casting process ran smooth. Let the world work alongside you. Regulus understood the phrase more deeply now. Before, he'd been muscling his way through space. That was hard. Space didn't appreciate being manhandled. Now he'd found the right method, and with the right method, the world cooperated. The space warp incantation was that method. It didn't alter the nature of space. It provided an approach that aligned with spatial rules, and magic did the rest. He stowed his wand and left the room of requirement, mind already moving to something else. Why didn't the Black family's inherited spells, Verdant magic and the Space Anchor Charm, have fixed incantations? The Space Anchor Charm was manageable. Its effect was clear, its application consistent. Through practice, he could now maintain 5 simultaneous anchors for 20 minutes. But Verdant magic? The ancestor Eldrin had possessed a rare gift, direct resonance with natural magical energy. For a wizard at that level, incantations might genuinely have been unnecessary. His talent functioned on instinct. But the purpose of inherited magic was to let descendants learn. If Verdant magic truly required innate talent as a barrier to entry, Wouldn't Eldrin have known? Wouldn't he have found a solution? Regulus let his thoughts branch. Maybe verdant magic was never meant to have a fixed form. Everyone resonated with nature differently. The point of entry shifted from person to person. The pathways for guiding magic diverged. Forcing a single incantation onto it might limit development rather than aid it. Regardless, the concern didn't weigh on him anymore. With the experience of developing the space warp incantation behind him, if verdant magic ever did need a spell framework, he'd build one himself. Chapter 115, Hermes, Unfinished Business. Walking back to the dormitory, Regulus took stock of the past 2 months. In Transfiguration, he hadn't cracked the elemental conversion barrier, but his precision and range had improved noticeably. He could give diamond the layered structure of graphite while keeping its hardness intact. The star integration had exceeded expectations. Protego reinforced with stars boosted defense by roughly 50% for only 15% more magical drain. A reasonable trade. The reductor curse paired with a supernova burst image doubled its power, but also doubled the cost. Best saved for critical moments. More importantly, he'd discovered that different imagery could alter a spell's fundamental nature. The same incendio behaved completely differently depending on the image behind it. A burning star produced sustained, searing heat. A falling meteor added concussive force. Side shift spell cooldown was down to 1.5 seconds. Switching between the swiftness spell and the sprint spell came with almost no delay. He was still primarily ground mobile, but his survival odds in complex environments had genuinely improved. His magical plant research had advanced his attribute theory. Dittany's healing inclination. Venomous tentacula's paralytic inclination. Devil's snare's predatory inclination. The whomping willow's physical inclination. These tendencies were inherent properties of each plant's magical energy. Understanding that meant he could guide and harness plant magic far more efficiently. The biggest gain was the completed space warp incantation. Built from nothing. Elevated from personal ability to teachable magic. Proof that his method worked. Observe the phenomenon. Analyze the principle. Construct a model. Develop the application. Then add a touch of magic. But none of that mattered as much as one other thing. Confirming his magical path, and Dumbledore's additions to it. He knew the road now. Balance between reason and intuition. Control and release walking side by side. Do what needed doing, let magic handle the rest. Verdant magic hadn't broken through yet. All he could do was repeat the practice and wait for quantity to become quality. Or deepen his understanding of nature, but that required the right moment. At least his star-guided meditation was progressing steadily. Bellatrix had brightened to half-luminance, and his mental fortitude continued to grow. As for Professor Sprout's sunlight ebony bush, even if she gave permission, he wouldn't touch it yet. That plant demanded a pure inclination toward light. He wasn't ready. Or more accurately, he couldn't comprehend that kind of light. Couldn't become it. If he wanted to make contact and establish a magical connection, he'd need a different approach entirely. He hadn't found one yet. Fiend fire needed to move up the schedule. The attribute-level natural suppression Dumbledore had described was beyond him for now. But Fiend Fire's burn everything philosophy could serve as a backup plan. Not something he could practice at school, though. That would have to wait for the holidays. He pushed open the Slytherin dormitory door. Cuthbert and Alex were playing wizard chess. Both looked up when he walked in. Hermes gets discharged tomorrow, Cuthbert said, a night piece pinched between his fingers. Should we go meet him? Regulus nodded. We should. Madame Pomfrey says he's fine, Alex added quietly. Curse completely removed. He's just weak, needs a few more days of rest. Good. Regulus hung up his robes. He did want Hermes to truly join the group. Cuthbert and Alex each brought something to the table. Cuthbert was a future hub in pure-blood social circles. His spell work lagged behind, but no one else could fill the spokesman role. Alex was careful and thorough, suited for handling practical matters. But wizards ultimately spoke through magic, and Hermes had that potential. His obsession with the dark arts was a problem, but one that could be guided, controlled, even shaped through teaching. The real question was what Hermes chose for himself. The astronomy tower incident had created an opening. The Mulciber family's stance was already clear. What remained was whether Hermes was willing to follow. The next morning, the three of them went to the hospital wing. Hermes sat on the edge of his bed, already changed into clean robes. His face was still pale, but far better than before. He looked up when they entered. Said nothing. Just gave a small nod. Madame Pomfrey was changing bandages on another patient. She waved them off without looking up. Take him. No strenuous activity, light meals, come back for a checkup in 3 days. Cuthbert walked over and clapped Hermes on the shoulder. Let's go. Alex practically buried your bed under his stuff. Alex flushed. I was just storing things temporarily. Hermes stood, moving slowly. He picked up a small cloth bundle from the nightstand, probably spare clothes and personal items, and followed them out of the hospital wing. Passing another bed, Regulus caught a glimpse of Darren McNair from the corner of his eye. He lay flat, blanket pulled to his chin, eyes shut. But his eyelids twitched faintly. Faking sleep. Or rather, hiding. Regulus knew Darren was awake. Madame Pomfrey's treatment was effective. Once the curse was cleared, physical recovery was only a matter of time. But Darren lay motionless. Eyes closed. No interaction with anyone. Like a breathing corpse. He was afraid. The mission had failed. The family had lost a critical artifact. The resentment plague wand was in Dumbledore's hands now, and Darren himself was hospitalized with serious injuries. Regulus glanced once and looked away. Darren was a fool. As long as he remained at Hogwarts, his life wasn't in danger. Dumbledore wouldn't allow a student to come to harm on school grounds. But outside? How the McNair family dealt with their failures was their business. Regulus didn't care. Everyone bore the consequences of their own choices. Darren had picked his path. He'd live with what came. Dash. The 4 of them left the hospital wing and walked back along the underground corridor. Cuthbert talked about recent Quidditch matches. Alex chimed in occasionally. Hermes listened in silence. Regulus walked at the front. Laughter echoed from somewhere distant. A classroom leaked the smell of potion ingredients at a rolling boil. A woman in a portrait hummed an old song. Back in the Slytherin dormitory, the door swung shut behind them. Cuthbert tossed his bag onto his bed, pulled out a chair, and dropped into it. Alex drifted to the window and looked out over the black lake. A few giant squid drifted slowly past, tentacles brushing the glass. Hermes stood in the middle of the room, still clutching the cloth bundle. He didn't go to his bed. Didn't speak. Just stood there. Regulus finished hanging his robes and turned to face him. A few seconds of quiet passed before Hermes spoke. Dumbledore told me. His voice was rougher than before his stay, like it hadn't been used in a while. About the astronomy tower. Regulus gestured for him to continue. He said the 3 of you went investigating because of what happened to me. That you walked in on Darren McNair breaking through the last protective charm, and the curse nearly trapped you all inside. His gaze swept across Regulus, Cuthbert, and Alex, then settled on Regulus. He said if you hadn't stayed behind to cover their retreat, those 2 might not have made it out. Regulus just nodded. All that matters is you're recovered. I just wanted to say. Hermes looked down at the bundle in his hands. You deserve to know what happened. He walked to his bed and sat. The bundle landed beside him. His eyes swept the room. My family told me to work with McNair. Break the protective charms beneath the astronomy tower and retrieve what was inside. They never said what it was, only that it was important. Critical to the family's future. His gaze dropped to the floor as he spoke. We spent 2 months on it. McNair brought tools from home. Progress was smooth. The charms were almost broken when... He paused. His brow furrowed, nostrils flaring, as if a painful memory had surfaced. I thought we were about to succeed. But at the last moment, McNair used that crystal, you may have seen it, the one with the grey mist sealed inside. He released whatever was in it, aimed straight at me. I wasn't expecting it. Too close to dodge. Regulus listened. It aligned almost perfectly with what he'd already pieced together. 2 families cooperating. One stabbing the other in the back at the finish line, trying to take everything. After that, I don't remember anything. Hermes lifted his head. When I woke up, I was in the hospital wing. Dumbledore was beside me. Told me it was over. The artifact had been sealed. Darren was hurt too. He looked at Regulus. Did you find out the truth? We did, Regulus said. But the details aren't something I can get into right now. All you need to know is that it's been handled. Dumbledore took care of it.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.